Chapter 1600. After squatting until her legs were numb, the door of the court opened. All sorts of celebratory sounds could be heard. Wei Wei Bai looked carefully and realized that the person in the crowd was actually Ning Jioma. The weather had just cleared up and the dark clouds had dispersed. The sunlight was like gold, shining on the stone-green robe. The silk fabric shone with a glossy light. His features were picturesque. His cold and noble eyes were full of elegance. His thin lips were cold and red. His hair was tied up with a jade crown, revealing his well-defined face. There was no hideous wound on the disfigured half of his face. It was just a light red mark that fell on the corner of his eye on one side of his face. It was like a flower in spring, extremely beautiful, but also extremely faint. The naive look in Ning Jioma's eyes disappeared and was replaced by calmness with restrained ambition. Wei Wei Bai suddenly felt that Fool Ning had changed. He had become more good-looking. He had also become smarter. It seemed that it was difficult to cheat him of his favorability. Ning Jioma missed Fool Ning when he disappeared. Ning Jioma calmly bade farewell to the officials one by one. His every move was noble and elegant, low-key and calm. He left a good impression on the officials. More importantly, everyone knew about it. Fool Ning Jioma had been reborn. He was a noble person appointed by Heavenly Master Lin and the Emperor. His future was bound to be limitless. Ning Jioma was followed by a few attentive eunuchs. He looked straight ahead as he walked. When he brushed past the pillar where Wei Wei Bai was hiding, Ning Jioma raised his eyes slightly, and the corners of his mouth curled up into a casual smile. His indifferent and noble smile was now indescribably complacent. Wei Wei Bai looked at him blankly. He straightened his back and walked over as if he was showing off. It was as if he wanted Wei Wei Bai to regret that she had despised him. Zheng Yao immediately tugged at Wei Wei Bai. "Quick, follow him. You are now Prince Ning's little palace maid." Ning Jioma pretended to forget everything. So Wei Wei Bai, the palace maid who had been following him. Ning Jioma would definitely pretend not to know him. Zheng Yao's role was to transfer Wei Wei Bai to Ning Jioma's side again. She was once again his palace maid. Wei Wei Bai was not eye-catching, and the emperor was too lazy to care about Ning Jioma's life. As long as Ning Jioma attended every time the emperor performed a ritual, it would be fine. Therefore, it didn't matter whether Ning Jioma had more or less palace maids by his side. Hence, after Ning Jioma lost his memory, Wei Wei Bai had become like this. While a bunch of palace maids were fighting to go to King Ning Palace to be servants, she returned to Ning Jioma's side so easily. She realized that Ning Jioma's palace had changed from that dilapidated cold palace. They moved to the busiest central hall. This was the closest place to the emperor's palace. It seemed that the old emperor also knew that cultivating immortality was a crime against the heavens. Therefore, once it was confirmed that Ning Jioma was the scapegoat to block the disaster, he immediately moved him to the spot closest to him. This place was completely different from the dilapidated cold palace. There were people everywhere, and they were all well-behaved. There was a garden full of peach blossoms. When Wei Wei Bai entered the inner hall, she saw Ning Jioma sitting casually on the bed. He was wearing a stone-green robe. He had already taken off his jade crown, and his black hair was draped over his shoulders. His facial features were exquisite, and his face was naturally cold. His every move seemed to have been practiced, and it looked better than a fox's dance. Wei Wei Bai entered the hall, but the door was closed by Zheng Yi. In the gorgeous hall, the fragrance of sandalwood rose in spirals from the expensive incense burner. Chapter 1601. Bai Wei Wei looked him up and down, then obediently crouched down and saluted, "Your Highness." Ning Jioma snorted. "Why? You're pretending now? Weren't you bold before?" Sure enough, once he gained power, the little palace maid had to lower her head and bow to him. Ning Jioma casually picked up the wine pot beside him, and his eyes fell on her neck. It was white and more fragrant than the glutinous rice ball. He drank and said with a smile, "Look, as long as I gain power, we don't have to go back to the cold palace." Wei Wei Bai suddenly looked up and frowned. She got up and rushed in front of him. Then she took the wine pot away from him. She slammed the wine pot on the table with so much force that a crack appeared on the table. Ning Jiama looked at the crack, and his mouth twitched. Wei Wei Bai said coldly, "Your Highness, who allowed you to drink? You're not in good health. How can you drink?" Ah. Her cute and adorable appearance immediately turned into a murderous aura as soon as her mother got close to her. Ning Jiama felt guilty for a moment, and then remembered that his identity was different. He immediately slammed the table. "How dare you? You even want to control me when I drink. Who do you think you are?" Wei Wei Bai's eyes hardened, and she slammed the table. "I'm doing this for your own good. My husband is still in your body. If you drink too much, what will happen to him?" She slammed the table too hard, and it suddenly cracked. Ning Jiama wanted to shout back, but when he saw the table, he bent his fingers and retracted them. Was she still a woman? She was so strong. He still said stubbornly, "The body is mine." He's just a lonely soul, and he wants to take over the magpie's nest? Bai Weiwei snorted coldly, then obediently crouched down and lowered her head. Ning Jiama looked at her and felt that he had punched cotton. He was so aggrieved. He had been posing for a long time, but she didn't even look at his face when she came in. She didn't look at the gorgeous decorations around him. There was also his elegant and graceful appearance. She just stared at him to drink. Could it be that his current appearance was not worthy of admiration? Why wasn't she surprised at all that he had regained his looks? Ning Jiama sulked for a long time before suddenly saying, "Hey." Wei Wei Bai's legs were numb from squatting. She didn't look at him in a good mood. "What are you doing?" Ning Jiama deliberately turned his face, which was almost healed and only had a small red mark on it, towards her. "Do you think I'm different today?" Wei Wei Bai sized him up and guessed. "You've become more arrogant. Are you asking for a beating?" Ning Jiama almost suffocated himself to death. He immediately reached out and patted his recovered face. "Here." Wei Wei Bai looked at him, as if she was looking an idiot. So there really was someone who slapped his own face. Ning Jiama suddenly felt that his actions were too stupid. He immediately stopped patting and sat back down. His expression turned cold again. "In the future, you will be my head palace maid. You will serve me. If that fool appears, tell him to imitate me. Otherwise, we will all die together." Wei Wei Bai said coldly. "Okay." She didn't say a single word of nonsense. There was no intimacy at all. Then the atmosphere froze. Silence and awkwardness took over the gorgeous palace. Wei Wei Bai had nothing to do and chatted with the system. "Ning Jiama is so arrogant. When we go to jail?" The system said, "You're catching fools to increase your favorability." Wei Wei Bai didn't treat Ning Songming well at all. Chapter 1602. Bai Wei Wei. I had no choice, In the beginning, I brushed the line with idiot Ning. If he became smart, I would happily please him. With this kind of fickle appearance, the favorability would plummet. Do you believe it? People like Ning Jiama. He was bullied badly. Although he was full of schemes, there were others who were as scheming as him. He would only be on guard and wouldn't have a favorable impression of her. Moreover, it was best for idiot Ning to gain favorable impression of her. She could gain idiot Ning's favor and complete the mission in the end. She couldn't be bothered to gain idiot Ning's favor anymore. Anyway, the mission didn't say that she had to gain 2 favorability points. By salted fish, Wei gave Ning Jiama a cold face very calmly. She really missed idiot Ning when he wasn't around. Ning Jiama felt that the atmosphere was too cold. When he was stupid, she was willing to give him anything. The atmosphere was joyous and harmonious. But once he became smart, she seemed to want him to die. Ning Jiama thought that she would look at him differently after he gained power. In the end, she was blind and couldn't see any changes in him. Ning Jiama also felt a little smug. After all, he had only succeeded once. There was still a long way to go. Thinking of this, Ning Jiama couldn't be smug anymore. He pointed at the plate beside him. There was a pink and blue palace dress on it. "This is your dress. You can change." The pink palace dress was worn by the lowest-ranked palace maids. His identity was different now, so she would also be promoted. She would become a personal palace maid. With the pink and blue palace dress, she would have no problem walking sideways among the palace maids. Ning Jiama said casually, changed behind the screen. With that said, as if to avoid suspicion, he lay on the mat and turned his back to Wei Wei Bai. She was silent for a long time before she finally picked up the dress and walked behind the screen. Ning Jioma rolled his eyes and turned to face the screen. He saw her changing behind the screen. The graceful and petite figure behind the screen had a natural seductive feeling. As Ning Jioma watched, his heart heated up. He couldn't help but pick up the wine again and drink a few mouthfuls. Then he put it back and pretended he hadn't drunk it. Seeing that Wei Wei Bai was about to come out, he turned around and went back. He didn't feel guilty at all for peeping. She was his woman anyway. He could look at it however he liked. There was a golden bell tied to the belt of the palace dress, which he had specially made. That way, when she walked, he would be able to find her. When he heard the sound of the bell, he immediately turned around and saw Wei Wei Bai with her head lowered. She was holding her pink-blue dress in her hands as she walked over carefully. The dress was much longer than the pink one. The pink palace made uniform was short because she had to do heavy work. On the other hand, the pink-blue color didn't require much work, so the hemline of the dress was much longer and bigger. It was like a blooming blue lotus, and every step it took made it seem like it was floating on clouds. Wei Wei Bai's hair was simply tied up without too many decorations. Her skin was crystal clear, her beautiful lips were delicate like cherry blossoms, and her eyes were clear and bright. She was wearing a more ladylike pink-blue palace dress. She was even more peaceful and sweet. Ning Jioma's eyes darkened. He realized that his palace maid was too attractive. In that broken palace, she had never dressed up properly. When she smiled, many of the palace servants at the bottom would let her go. But now, she was dressed better and dressed more exquisitely. Not many people in the harem could compare to her. / Fast. Chapter 1603. Ning Jioma had the urge to take off her clothes, mess up her hair, and make her ugly. Wei Wei Bai put on her clothes and bowed respectfully to Ning Jioma. Your Highness, if there's nothing else, I'll take my leave first. She wasn't even willing to stay with him for a while now. Ning Jioma couldn't be bothered to beg her. He snorted. If you want to scram, then scram. With that said, he turned to face her. Wei Wei Bai turned to leave without hesitation. But just as she opened the door, a weak voice sounded behind her. Oh Wei, where are you going? Wei Wei Bai's fingers froze. She immediately turned around and revealed a bright smile. Your Highness, you're awake. With this smile, the calmness in her eyes became lively and pleasant. Ning Jioma looked at her in a daze and said clumsily, Here, where is this? She immediately rushed over, her dress fluttering and the bells ringing. Like a butterfly, she threw herself into his arms and hugged him tightly. Your Highness, it's okay. I'm here. It's the same everywhere. This sentence made Ning Jioma relax. He was silent for a while before saying, Without Wei here, I'm not afraid anymore. Wei Wei Bai looked up and smiled sweetly. Your Highness, you have to be obedient and listen to me in the future. Only then can we leave the palace. She was still thinking about leaving the palace. Ning Jioma's eyes narrowed, but he didn't say anything. He acted like a fool. He was that fool. So it was very easy for him to lie to her. Ning Jioma carefully grabbed her hand. Why can't we leave the palace now? Wei Wei Bai was stunned and forced a smile. Because the weather is bad. Ning Jioma's eyes darkened. Rain. Wei Wei Bai quickly said, Yes, it's raining. Ning Jioma reached out and gently placed his hand beside her cheek, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. He revealed a silly smile. Oh Wei, you're so pretty. Wei Wei Bai was stunned for a moment. Then a sweet smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. She held his face with both hands and gently kissed the red mark on his cheek. Your Highness is also good-looking. Ning Jioma paused for a moment before touching his face helplessly. Just now, all the civil and military officials in the imperial court were praising him as if he was a divine being, but he didn't feel anything. Her simple words made him feel as if he had really regained his original appearance. Ning Jioma said slowly, Ah Wei, isn't this place good? Wei Wei Bai shook her head. No, this is not a good place for us to stay. Ning Jioma asked in a daze why. Wei Wei Bai said, Because we are too stupid and the people here are too smart. We will be bullied to death here. When the weather is better, I will take you out of the palace." She spoke earnestly and tenderly. She then turned around and said, "Your Highness, it's time for dinner. I'll go and see if the food is ready. Don't go out and wait for me to come back." Ning Juma nodded obediently. "Okay, I'll wait for you." Bai Weiwei walked out with a peace of mind. The bell rang, jingling. When the sound of the bell was far away, the foolishness in Ning Jiuma's eyes disappeared. He looked in the direction she left for a long time. He suddenly said softly, "You're stupid. Don't you still have me?" With him here, who could bully her? Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 65. A respectful voice came from outside the door. "Your Highness." It was Zheng Xiao. The gentleness in Ning Jiuma's eyes disappeared. "Come in." Zheng Xiao came in and knelt down to kowtow. She then softly talked about what happened in the imperial court and the crown prince's situation. He won't make it for more than a few days. The drug is too strong. If there is no antidote, the crown prince will die. Chapter 1604. Ning Jiuma was indifferent. "How's the Empress?" Zheng Kuang said. After smashing everything in the palace, the Empress was so angry that she vomited blood. She rushed to find the Emperor before the imperial doctor even called. Ning Jiuma smiled coldly. She went to find Father. When he called Father, his tone was so heavy that it could kill. Zheng Kuang said, "The Emperor's palace is more secure. Our people can't infiltrate, so we don't know what the Empress is doing now." Ning Jiuma reached out and held his forehead, his eyes cold. "I'll go greet her. I haven't greeted the Empress since I regained my mind." After he finished, he immediately got up. Zheng Kuang followed him. Ning Jiuma said, "Let someone drag Wei. Don't let her know where I'm going." She thought that he was in a fool state now. If she knew that he wasn't a fool, but he kept lying to her, she would definitely be very angry. Zheng Kuang frowned. His Highness cared about the little palace maid. Too much. Zheng Kuang didn't dare to say anything more and just agreed. Ning Jiuma left in a hurry. Zheng Kuang immediately ordered, "Wash the girl and tie her to His Highness' bed." His Highness really cared about the little palace maid. The little palace maid was also loyal. If she could become His Highness's concubine, it would be a great honor. Zheng Kuang felt that she had tied the red string well. Wei Weibai was looking at whether the meal was ready. She was hungry. Ning Jiuma wouldn't starve to death, but she couldn't. She could only work after she was full. The system said, "The male lead is fighting with the old emperor. The Empress is also there. It's like a battlefield." Wei Weibai looked at the others serving the dishes. Can't they let people eat? Fighting during mealtime. Do they want to starve people to death? The system said, "They're almost done." A shocking secret has been exposed. The old emperor was the one who drugged concubine Ro and the male lead. The poison that made Ning Jiuma stupid. It was the emperor. The emperor, who dealt with alchemy all year round, had a few strange poisons by his side. The one that made Ning Jiuma stupid was one of them. Wei Weibai looked at the dishes and couldn't move. She was so hungry that her stomach was sticking to her back. She wasn't interested and said, "Why would that dog emperor poison his own son?" The system said, concubine Ro was the emperor suspected that the emperor suspected emperor was not his son, so he poisoned them. They were supposed to be poisoned to death, but the poison that didn't work. Coincidentally, the empress, concubine Ro died. It was only because of Ning Jiuma's amazing luck that he could hold on until now. Later on, when the dog emperor found out that he had wrong consort Ro, he pretended that he had not poisoned her. From Kanamo, by Wei Wei. Such a big melon. Hurry up and finish your melon and come back, Ning Jiuma. She didn't have any feud with the target in this world, but the target had a feud with her family. The target in every world was a scam. She had to take revenge every time. After Bai Weiwei finished speaking, a small eunuch serving the dishes next to her handed over a cup of tonic. "This is what His Highness ordered. It's for you." Wei Weibai asked the poison testing system, "Is it poisonous?" System, "No, but..." Transmigration system, "My Prince Charming, come here." /crossover system, "Adonis, come here and read the full article at https://www. Sashu. com//crossover system. Prince Charming, come here. Download address https://www.sashu.com crossover system. Prince Charming, come here. Mobile reading address https://m sashu.com// button, and next time you open the bookshelf, you will be able to see it. If you like crossover system, Prince Charming, come here. Chapter 1605. Wei Wei Bai didn't argue when she heard that it wasn't poisoned. After all, Ning Juma definitely wouldn't be back anytime soon. She couldn't go back and expose him for acting dumb. She would definitely starve to death if she waited. So she picked up the tonic and saw that it was soup. How stingy! There wasn't even any soup residue. Wei Wei Bai felt disgusted and swallowed it. System, after drinking Wei Wei Bai, she asked, but what? System, it's not poisonous, but it's drugged. An aphrodisiac that makes your limbs weak. Wei Wei Bai, system, everyone in the palace knows that you have an affair with the male lead. So when the male lead hinted, the people below prepared something for him. Wei Wei Bai was a gift prepared. Selling myself again. Bai salted fish sighed helplessly. System, how about buying a substitute sticker? Wei Wei Bai, is there a discount? The system replied, there's no way I'll give you a discount. Not for the rest of my life. This thing was a hot seller, and once it was a hot seller, there was no discount. Wei Wei Bai, get lost. A few maids came over and hugged Wei Wei Bai, who was starting to feel weak and warm. Miss, take a bath and change your clothes. Wei Wei Bai's limbs were weak as she was dragged away and bathed in petals. Then she was dragged onto a large bed by the maids, with silver curtains hanging around her. She tried to shout, Tongzi. The system didn't respond. Wei Wei Bai curled up into a ball. While she was bathing, the system was probably blocked. For Wei Wei Bai, this medicine wasn't heavy, so she could bear it. It wasn't the kind of miraculous medicine that would kill her if she didn't do it. If Ning Jima didn't come back, she estimated that after 2 or 3 hours, the medicine would be gone. So Wei Wei Bai's face was red as she leaned against the pillow, hugging the blanket and enduring silently. Suddenly, there was a rumble outside. It was thunder. Wei Wei Bai was still counting sheep, so she didn't care. The sound of heavy rain could be heard, and the gloomy weather made the room even more dark. Suddenly, she heard the door open. Wei Wei Bai struggled to open her eyes. She couldn't see who it was through the bed curtain. It should be Ning Jioma. After all, in the Royal Azura Arena, as long as no one was killed, it was fine. It was time for Ning Jioma to come back for dinner. Not only was she hot, but she was also hungry. He had only eaten medicinal soup for one night, which was equivalent to eating nothing at all. A hand gently lifted the curtain of the bed. His fingers were stained with rainwater and were incomparably pale. Then Ning Jioma appeared. He was soaked in the rain and sat by the bed in a daze. His face was so pale that it was drained of blood. There was a sickly sense of fragility. He did not seem to notice that there was someone behind him. What? Ning Jioma said softly. He trembled. Why were you the one who poisoned him? It was only today that he found out that the one who had poisoned him and his mother was actually his father. Ning Jioma's voice trembled. You have the antidote, but you'd rather give it to the crown prince than me. Are you really my father? Wei Wei Bai rolled her eyes behind him. Big brother, stop acting. He clearly saw her when he came in just now. His gaze was so obvious when he looked away. And it was not the first time that dog of an emperor was so ruthless. Ning Jima's sudden betrayal of a father and son was simply too abrupt. Of course, Wei Wei Bai could not act as if she understood. After all, her information came from a system. Ning Jima's attitude was definitely because he was certain that she did not know about these things. That was why he came to act in front of her, pretending to be pitiful to gain sympathy. Ning Jioma was so into his act that a few drops of fake tears fell. Chapter 1606. He heard her heavy breathing behind him. Ning Jioma's lips curled into a smug smile. When he was stupid, he would gain sympathy. When he was smart, wouldn't he gain sympathy? Leave the palace? It was impossible for him to leave the palace in this lifetime. He was more of a way to let her accept him when he was sober. Today was a good day. He knew the truth of what happened back then. He also had a blood debt of revenge on the old emperor. When he ascended the throne step by step, that so-called father of his, he had even more reason to cut him into pieces. He knew the location of the antidote, even if the old emperor gave him an antidote because of the empress's fuss. Ning Jiuma knew that he wouldn't be able to get the antidote, because the empress would definitely be eager to give it to the crown prince. But the crown prince was impotent. The poison he gave him was much more poisonous than the one that made him stupid back then. A crown prince without descendants was nothing to be afraid of. He had to find an opportunity to get the rest of the antidote from the old emperor. He was poisoned too deeply. One antidote wasn't enough. He had to remove the poison in his bones. He definitely needed a lot of antidotes. He had to get all of them from the old emperor. He didn't even want to call that man father anymore. Every time he saw the emperor, he would smile. In fact, he didn't know how many times he cursed the old dog in his heart. Why wasn't he dead yet? He felt that he was an eyesore. Wei Wei Bai's breathing became heavier. It was even a little messy. Ning Jiuma still pretended to be hurt and pitiful. He was so pitiful. His mother was killed by his father, and he was poisoned. What miserable life. He was about to cry. Ning Jiuma's eyes were dark and sober. There was no sadness in them. His sadness had been worn down during those torturous years. So now that he was making use of his misery, he didn't hold back. Suddenly, his sleeve was grabbed by the person behind him. Her fingers pinched his sleeve so tightly that her nails turned white. Ning Jiuma understood. Her heart softened, and she wanted to comfort him. But in the next moment, a hot body hugged him from behind. "Your Highness," she murmured softly, her breath caressing his neck. It was so hot that the skin on his neck turned red. Wei Wei Bai's voice trembled. "Your Highness, I feel terrible." He babbled on, but she didn't listen at all. He felt that this pig trotter looked especially delicious. This medicine was simply poisonous. No man could endure it. Seeing a man simply made her hungry and thirsty. Only then did Ning Jiuma realize that something was wrong. He thought that Wei Wei Bai was just sleeping on the bed. After all, they had been sleeping together. Except for special occasions, he didn't dare to force himself on her. She was strong. He was afraid that he wouldn't be able to hold on and would end up with a broken bone. Ning Jiuma didn't know that his men had drugged Wei Wei Bai. But when Wei Wei Bai's kiss landed softly on his hair and by his ear, he couldn't help it. His ears immediately turned red, and he immediately understood what was going on. There was something wrong with Wei Wei Bai. He turned around and held her waist, pressing her into the soft bedding. He held her weak hands very easily. In the dark room, only the sound of the rain could be heard, and Ning Jiuma couldn't even hear the sound of the rain. He stared at Wei Wei Bai in a daze. Her eyes were half closed, and her face was abnormally red. The redness spread to her neck and into her scattered clothes. She seemed a little helpless, her eyes blurred and burning. Ning Jiuma held his breath. He felt that he had been acting pitiful for a long time, but in the end, he couldn't beat her simple sigh. Chapter 16:07. Someday, he might be murdered by her. Ning Jiuma hugged her helplessly and urgently. Suddenly, he had a splitting headache, and his vision turned black. He gritted his teeth and held it in. He wouldn't become stupid, right? Ning Jiuma trembled and reached for the bottle of suppressive antidote that was similar to poison. If he became stupid at this time, wouldn't that fool take advantage of him? Everything was his own fault. No, he felt that he had become stupid now. After thinking about it, it was like wearing a green hat for himself. But just as he reached out, his vision turned black, and he became confused. Ning Jiuma looked at everything in front of him in a daze and saw a person in his arms. It was Ah Wei. Fool Ning smiled. Wei Wei Bai hugged him softly and said softly, "Your Highness, I'm hot." Ning Jiuma immediately took off her clothes. "I'll fan you, it won't be hot soon." He took off his clothes and fanned her with his sleeves. Ah Wei was really hot. Her face was as red as a monkey's, but Wei Wei Bai nodded and looked up at him helplessly. She was sure that he was Fool Ning and not pretending. Her hand gently caressed his arm. "Your Highness, give me a hug." Her voice was low and soft. It was like a sweet cake. It sounded sweet on the tip of his tongue. Ning Jiuma hugged her obediently. As he hugged her, he also became hot. Then he lowered his head softly and hugged her gently. The sound of the rain outside the window and the candlelight inside the door swayed. Ning Jiuma only felt that his Wei was really beautiful. Ding! The male lead's favorability is at 85. The sound of the rain gradually faded away, and the morning birds chirped. Wei Bai had a splitting headache. Tongzi, next time someone tries to drug me, can you say it faster? This drug was to squeeze or dry. System, next time someone gives you food, can you not swallow it in one gulp? Even pigs couldn't eat as fast as the host. After the system finished speaking, it lowered its head and continued to bite the red thread. It had given up on burning it and was now biting the red thread with its teeth. Its teeth were very strong. Let's see if it could break it. The host still didn't know how hard it had been working, and she was still going to hook up with those young hunks. It was about to develop a revolutionary friendship with a bullet screen. If one day the two of them were killed by this red string, it would be too late. Wei Bai felt that Tongzi had been very cold recently. Did it secretly hook up with another host? Was she planning to have one foot in both boats? Wei Bai suddenly noticed that Ning Jiuma's breathing had become heavy. He was about to wake up. His favorability had also changed. Ding! The male lead's favorability is at 65. She felt that she was getting used to the dozens of bungee jumps. She pretended not to know and softly said, "Your Highness, are you poisoned?" Ning Jiuma had a splitting headache as he regained his senses. Last night, he was a fool and didn't know anything, even though the result was good. But he was even more dissatisfied. Then, he heard Wei Bai whisper in doubt. He was poisoned. Last night, he had said so much just to make her suspicious. He couldn't always pretend to be a lonely ghost. So he had to make her suspicious and let her know in the end. The fool she liked was him when he was poisoned. After all, he was the same person. Even if he was cured in the end, she couldn't deny that he was still her husband. Wei Bai sighed softly. What kind of poison is it? Ning Jiuma's body moved, and he was about to open his eyes, but she immediately crawled out of his arms and rolled into the quilt, pretending to be asleep. His mouth stiffened. She hid so quickly. / / Chapter 1608. Could it be that she really liked a fool like him? So she refused to tell the truth? Ning Jiuma got up and glared at the person curled up in the blanket. Pretending. What was there to pretend about with such lousy acting skills? He reached out and wanted to pull her out, but when he thought about how she wasn't wearing anything under the blanket, he didn't dare to reach out. Then he silently got out of bed and put on his clothes. He still had to go to the morning court and accompany that dog emperor to refine pills. He would think of a way to let her know the truth in the future. Ning Jiuma put on his clothes and lifted the bed curtain. He saw that she was curled up in a ball with her eyes tightly shut. Her face was still red, almost as red as the peach blossoms outside the window. His fingertips slid across her lips, and she shivered. Ning Jiuma smiled and didn't tease her anymore. Then he pretended not to know that she was awake and left again. When he walked out the door, Zheng Qiao came over. Ning Jiuma said, "I plan to have a secondary consort. You go and arrange it." In the end, the little palace maid was still promoted. Her status as the main wife was definitely not enough. So Ning Jiuma could only settle for the second best and let her be the concubine. Actually, it was also a kind of protection because the concubine didn't have to care too much and just had to take care of him. Zheng Qiao nodded. Ning Jiuma added, "All right, send a few people to serve her. Don't let her run around." He felt that the little palace maid was cute. He felt that everyone wanted to take a fancy to his little palace maid. Zheng Qiao held back her laughter and nodded respectfully. Ning Jiuma thought about it and nagged that the room was too unfeminine. There were a few more peach blossoms outside the window, and all the grass was pulled out. In the end, he suddenly stopped and frowned. "Okay, that's all. We'll talk about it later." He was the prince, so she should be the one serving him. Why did he feel like he was her servant, thinking about her every day? It was too degrading. Ning Jiuma snorted and strode away. Wei Bai sensed that Ning Jiuma had left. She spread out her limbs and fell asleep. The little fool's favorability towards her was 85. She also had to start thinking about how to complete the side mission. Wei Wei Bai said, I really don't want to hook up with the old emperor. Why don't we go and seduce him? The system had just taken a sip of juice and was about to swallow it when it almost choked itself to death. Host, where's your drive? What's the efficiency of your perfect side mission? You have to work hard. He didn't want to increase his favorability just because it was easy. He had directly given up on himself and was too lazy to do anything. Wei Wei Bai turned over. What's with the efficiency? I can't eat or drink. I'm going to sleep. The system's voice suddenly became soft. Empress, this servant greets you. Wei Wei Bai had goosebumps all over. The system was poisoned? The system continued in its eunuch voice. I see the peach blossoms blooming outside the window. Do you want to go and enjoy the flowers? Wei Wei Bai, fuck, don't use that voice. Have you watched too many palace dramas? The system roared. If you don't complete the side quest and cause me to become a eunuch, I will always use this voice to talk to you. It used this voice to talk to her all day long. Wei Wei Bai felt that her ears were going to rot sooner or later. Even the words of real eunuchs were not as pretentious and unpleasant as the system's. Wei Wei Bai could only get up and hold her forehead. Okay, I'll complete it. It's just an old man. I just have to smile at him and tell him not to see me if he doesn't want to be my empress. That's all. After all, there was the reward of the emperor's love. Chapter 1609. In addition, the old emperor was useless and incompetent. She didn't need to get close to the old man. She just needed to be the empress for a day. She immediately kicked the old man away. For someone who was obsessed with looks, who would come to the old man, just thinking about it made her wish she was dead. Why don't we? Wei Wei Bai said hesitantly. System, if we don't complete the mission, I will commit suicide and hang myself with a red string. Wei Wei Bai, hang yourself with a red string? The system is getting more and more sissy. Ning Jiamon knelt on the cushion. The old emperor was meditating, so he had to accompany him in his meditation. Not far from him was the empress. This woman was wearing a Taoist robe. She was trying to please the old emperor. This woman was also very scheming. She said that she wanted to cultivate the path of immortality with the old emperor. The old emperor was naturally happy. The crown prince also started to regain his consciousness, but because the poison was too deep, his brain was sometimes good and sometimes not. And his memory loss was so serious that he couldn't remember who was who. More importantly, he had completely withered. Ning Jiuma's eyes were dark. He glanced at the empress, then looked away and continued to kneel and meditate. When meditation was complete, the old emperor was served by someone to wash his face. Ning Jiuma was also thinking about how to talk about the concubine. He pretended to forget the past. Of course, he couldn't say that the little palace maid used to serve him. He could only say that he occasionally saw a woman and wanted to bring her into the palace because he liked her. The old emperor was in good health recently. Coupled with the medicine given by Heavenly Master Lin, he was also very excited. So he was in a good mood. Now that he asked to bring Wei Wei Bai into his palace, there shouldn't be a big problem. Ning Jioma even put aside the conspiracy and thought seriously about how to get a good reward for the little palace maid. Otherwise, with her low status, what if she was bullied in the future? Ning Jioma's eyes softened. He was about to look up and speak to the old emperor. The empress said gently, Your Majesty, the crown prince took the medicine you gave and his health is much better. It's not surprising that you gave the medicine. It's really something from the gods. When the old emperor heard this, he was indeed happy. Now that he heard about gods and immortals, he was very easy to talk to. Ning Jioma also revealed a gentle smile. The family of three was happy and harmonious. The empress suddenly looked at Ning Jioma. Mo, your father has always been good to you. He used to carry you to see the lanterns often. Ning Jioma almost broke his cultivation. This old woman was probably here to test him. What are you looking at? This dog of an emperor did hug me before. But that was just for show. Later on, when his mother got into trouble, he didn't even have the time to kill him, let alone hug him. Of course, Ning Jiuma couldn't say that. There was a moment of confusion on his face, as if he was trying to recall something. Then he frowned in distress. His young and tender face had a kind of endearing innocence. Really? But I forgot. But I know that Imperial Father is such a benevolent person. He must be very good to me. The Empress calmly sized him up. Of course, Your Majesty. Recently, the Prime Minister came to beg me. He said that his only daughter is almost 20 years old, but she is still bitterly waiting for Immerse. This concubine remembers that Immerse had a childhood relationship with her. The Emperor's cloudy eyes moved. That's true. Immerse has grown up, so I'll give you a princess consort. Ning Jilma's eyes narrowed, and his fingers clenched into fists in his sleeves. But he smiled gently. How can I not listen to Imperial Father's words? But I'm not in good health, and I'm afraid of delaying people. At https://www.sashu.com/full text at https://www.sashu.com download text at https://www.sashu.com at https://m/sashu.com. Chapter 16:10. The Emperor waved his hand indifferently. You're already so old. How can you not have a consort? I'll set a date for you to get married. Ning Jiumon knew that the Empress was eyeing him from behind. He couldn't reveal any flaws, so he could only hold on. But I forgot. I don't remember if there was a marriage in the past. The old Emperor looked up at Ning Jiumon. He saw the sincerity and purity in his eyes. He saw a disfigured fool in the imperial court with his own eyes. In the white light, he regained his consciousness. The scars on his face gradually fell off, revealing white and tender skin. He had turned into this pleasing appearance. The Taoist master said that the reborn Ning Jiumon would treat his father as the most important person and help him block the disaster. Looking at Ning Jiumon's current appearance, he was no different from his pleasing appearance in the past. After all, he was still his own child. He had already forgotten the past. The Emperor felt a little more kinship in his heart. He said, marriage is still necessary. If you have a girl you like, you can also take her as your consort. Ning Jiumon's eyes lit up. I met a palace maid recently. I admire her very much. Please help me. The Emperor frowned. Palace maid? Her status is too low. Give her the position of concubine. Ning Jiumon's face showed a trace of annoyance. But I said I would give her the position of secondary consort. Now it's just a concubine. When I go back, I will be seen as a person who doesn't keep his word. I will lose face. The Emperor looked at his relaxed appearance and actually found it pleasing to the eye. He was tired and waved his hand. Bring her here for me to take a look. Then I will personally give her the position of secondary consort. I will save your face. Ning Jiumon immediately revealed a happy smile. Father, you are indeed the best father. The Empress's face turned cold. She didn't expect Ning Jiumon to win the Emperor's favor so quickly. She was about to say something. The Emperor waved his hand. Okay, call that girl over first and make her the secondary consort. As for the consort, we will talk about it later. After taking in a secondary consort, the consort's matter could only be put aside first. Otherwise, if concubines Su and Wang Fei entered at the same time, it would be too troublesome. Ning Jiumon immediately nodded and got up to instruct the eunuch outside to bring someone in. The Empress could no longer maintain her smile. The old Emperor trusted Ning Jiumon so much. Thinking about how the Crown Prince's condition was still not stable, the Empress was so worried that her hair turned white. The antidote from before was obtained by sacrificing a lot of benefits. After all, the Crown Prince had done such a disgraceful thing. He was lucky that the Emperor didn't beat him to death. The Empress could only continue to wait and see if she could get the second antidote. This kind of poison was slow-acting and required a lot of antidotes. She didn't know who had poisoned her, but the Empress was so angry that she dug her nails into her palms. If she found out, she would make that person die a horrible death and destroy his family. Therefore, compared to overthrowing Ning Jiumon, the Crown Prince's illness was more important. After waiting for a while, the Emperor could not hold it in any longer. Although his spirit would be stimulated after taking the pill, he would not be able to hold on any longer. but they would also feel sleepy. The emperor said, Zhen will rest first. When Zhen wakes up, I will send someone to your hall to announce the decree. Ning Jima was not very happy that Wei Wei Bai had caught the emperor's attention, so he immediately nodded respectfully and said with a smile, This son obeys the decree. The emperor got up, and a head eunuch beside him immediately helped him out. Wei Wei Bai was led through the door by Zheng. There was still one more door to see Ning Jima. Chapter 16:11. The system said, That old emperor has already left. Wait until your favorability reaches 90 before you attempt the side mission. Wei Wei Bai said, Let's not attempt it. I can't bring myself to do it to the old emperor. The system said, I'll hang myself. Wei Wei Bai said, Go ahead. The system was speechless. Suddenly, pink petals appeared in front of her, dancing in the air. Bai Wei Wei. What the hell? What are these illusory petals? Ever since I saw you in the crowd, you are like the faint mark of cherry blossoms, left in my heart. From now on, the world is yours, the mountains and rivers are yours, and time is yours. I'm also yours. Wei Wei Bai was speechless. What the hell is with all these pretentious, sick, and repetitive sentences? The system said, that emperor is like this when he starts everything. Wei Wei Bai said, Why does he start everything for no reason? The system said, It's like this. The old emperor is not far from you, looking at you. Wei Wei Bai instinctively turned to look. She saw the emperor standing at the door, as if he was about to leave. However, after taking half a step, his body froze. The system said, Don't look at him. The more you look at him, the stronger your love for the emperor will be. Wei Wei Bai saw the wrinkles on the emperor's face and quietly withdrew her gaze. Then, she followed the little eunuch through the door expressionlessly. She pretended not to see the emperor's gaze. Don't look at me with a face full of wrinkles. She refused. Wei Wei Bai hurriedly followed the eunuch. The emperor, who was standing at the door, froze for a long time. The head eunuch beside him asked carefully, Your Majesty, what's wrong? Why did he suddenly stop moving? Is he about to become a deity? The emperor said with a trembling voice, Who was that just now? The head eunuch looked back. It should be the concubine that His Highness King Ning is about to take in. The emperor reached out and clutched his chest, his face trembling. His eyes were terrifyingly bright. I suddenly feel like I've found the meaning of life. What longevity? What immortal cultivation? How can they compare to her? We definitely knew each other in our previous lives. No. Tears flowed from the emperor's eyes. We will definitely be a pair for all eternity. But now, I was born, but you were not. When you were born, I was already old. No wonder I was so obsessed with longevity. It was all because I wanted to meet her. The eunuch was speechless. Oh no, the emperor's brain is damaged from the medicine he took. The system nagged at Wei Wei Bai. That love of the emperor will automatically create a romantic atmosphere, such as life after life, and so on. As soon as Wei Wei Bai thinks of this, a pile of pink petals flutters in the air. He saw the lover of his life. The old emperor with a wrinkled face. Wei Wei Bai expressed that she would be with him forever if he was good-looking. If you're ugly and have wrinkles, I'll beat you to death. Wei Wei Bai, I'll endure 100 times. Who asked me to go after an old man? I'll cut him off first. The system fell to the ground with a thud. In the future, I'll become a eunuch and sing Little Apple in your ears forever. Wei Wei Bai, Ning Jima's eyes were almost bursting with joy. When he saw Wei Wei Bai walk in, he immediately rushed over. If it wasn't for the Empress, he would have hugged her. When he saw the Empress's cold face, he immediately held Wei Wei Bai's hand and bowed to her. Mother, I'll take my leave. The Empress snorted coldly and didn't say anything. Ning Jima respectfully turned around and pulled Wei Wei Bai's arm as he walked out. The warm sun shone on his face. His respectful expression gradually turned sinister. To the save button below to record this reading record. Chapter 16:12. These old bastards, I'll kill them sooner or later. Ning Jima cursed in his heart. After walking out of the door, he lowered his head and saw a confused Wei Wei Bai. The darkness on his face disappeared and was replaced by joy. I told you that you'll have meat to eat if you follow me. Do you believe me? Wei Wei Bai frowned. Can you let go of my hand? Ning Jiumal. Why? Can't I hold your hand if I'm not a fool? You didn't even think about how you tried to bully me last night. Wei Wei Bai was stunned. Then, she straightened her neck. Who drugged me? In the end, it was my husband who came out. Did you peek again? Can you be more shameless? Ning Jiumal was so angry that his neck was thick. You're so heartless. Whoever drugged you is a dog. Look at me now. Which girl wouldn't like me? Why would they use such a despicable trick like drugging me? You're the one who ate the food. Who's to blame? And who's looking at you? With your shriveled body and ugly face. Wei Wei Bai looked at him coldly. Who knows who's ugly? You look like a toad, and you still have the cheek to despise me. System. Did these two graduate from kindergarten? Couldn't they scold something more elegant? Suddenly, the system felt gloomy. Then, the system looked up and saw the old emperor standing at the top of the building, looking down bitterly. System. It seemed to see the pink petals flying behind the old emperor. It was so hot that it was blinded. I suddenly understood why the host would rather cut ties with the old emperor than attack him. If I'm handsome, harassing you is a domineering CEO falling in love with me. If I'm ugly, it's sexual harassment. Perverts. I need to see more. In this world, looks were still justice. The system touched its face. Sigh. Fortunately, it was handsome. It couldn't see the evil intentions of this world. Wei Wei Bai and Ning Jiumal bickered all the way back to the palace. In the end, Ning Jiumal said angrily, I went to ask for an imperial edict for you. In the future, you will be conferred by the emperor himself. Anyone who dares to bully you will have to think twice. An imperial edict for a concubine. It was a very heavy weight. Wei Wei Bai frowned. To be your concubine? Didn't you say that you would release my husband in the future? If he comes back from the dead, how can I be with him? Ning Jiumal was so angry that he didn't think too much about it. He said directly, Why do you always remember when I'm stupid? It's always the same person. Wei Wei Bai was stunned. Ning Jiumal was also stunned. Then, the way Ning Jiumal looked at her gradually changed. He immediately felt a little scared and took a few steps back. This king is hungry. I want to eat. With that, Ning Jiumal immediately turned and left. Wei Wei Bai reacted and immediately reached out to grab his hand, looking anxious. What do you mean by the same person? Ning Jiumal immediately started a tug-of-war with her, wanting to snatch her hand back. Wei Wei Bai grabbed him so hard that he grimaced in pain. You heard me wrong. I mean, we can talk about the future later. Let's settle you down first. In the future, in this palace, who knows how ruthless the fighting will be. She had an additional layer of protection as a concubine, so she wouldn't be killed for no reason. After all, it was common for a palace made to die just like that. Wei Wei Bai's eyes trembled. Ning Jiumal was afraid that she would take things too hard and immediately said, I'm joking, let go. Wei Wei Bai's face was cold as she stared at him. She didn't seem to believe him. Ning Jiumal became even more scared. His voice softened a little. I didn't eat anything so early in the morning to get you a concubine or something. You're not going to starve me to death, right? Chapter 16:13. Bai Weiwei saw his soft appearance and pretended to be a fool. Unexpectedly, he was similar to that fool. Her expression changed, and she suddenly looked away, shaking off his hand. Her voice was a little muffled, as if she was very sad. Don't make such jokes in the future. With that, Wei Wei Bai turned to leave. Ning Jiumal immediately pounced over and hugged her from behind. Are you still going to eat? Do you want to starve yourself to death? With that said, he dragged the dazed Wei Wei Bai away. Ning Jiumal's eyes had a dark smile. She knew that he poisoned her. She also heard what he blurted out. This way, she would suspect and unravel that he was actually the same person as the fool. Ning Jiumal deliberately made this scene. It was to make her doubt him. Only in this way would she be mentally prepared when the truth was revealed. He would slowly wear away her unwillingness, even if he was no longer a fool. She couldn't let go of him anymore. If Ning Jiumal wanted someone, he would do anything to scheme. He couldn't give her what she wanted to leave the palace, but he would share everything else with her. If there was one person in this world, he was willing to share the power toy in his hands with her. That should be Wei Wei Bai. There was no reason, it was just because she was cute. Under the suppression of the medicine, Ning Jiuma's sobriety was so long that no one noticed anything strange. He could guarantee that he wouldn't be a fool for a day if he took a pill. But this was destroying his own body. He knew very well, so he had to get the antidote as soon as possible. After dinner, Ning Jiuma pulled Wei Wei by to drink. Wei Wei Bai frowned. You're a prince, but you don't want to build a country. You only know how to play all day. Ning Jiuma rolled the dice and got the most points. I win, you drink. Wei Wei Bai's face was cold as she poured a glass of wine in her mouth. The temperature of the wine made her face start to turn red. Her red lips were moist and soft. Ning Jiuma's breathing became erratic as he calmly played with the dice with his fingers. I also want to make a name for myself, but my royal father doesn't want to see me do well. If I'm too powerful, he'll kill me. Wei Wei Bai's eyelashes trembled slightly. She did not quite understand. Why? Ning Jiuma smiled and narrowed his eyes. Because he's the emperor. What am I? I'm just a piece of trash that he abandoned in the filthy land. If I'm too powerful, he'll throw me back again. Wei Wei Bai's face was as red as the clouds, and her eyes were blank. He didn't seem to understand why the royal family was so cruel. Ning Jiuma's heart softened as he whispered, "Ah Wei, everyone in this palace can't wait for me to die." Wei Wei Bai held her wine glass and didn't say anything. Ning Jiuma smiled sadly. How could I forget? You can't wait for me to die so that your idiot husband can take over my body. Wei Wei Bai's fingers couldn't help but tighten, and the wine glass was crushed. Ning Jiuma's expression changed. He immediately grabbed her hand and slapped away the wine glass shards. Her fingers were only red, but there was no wound. Ning Jiuma heaved a sigh of relief. Then he frowned. Are you stupid? Why did you break the glass? Is a glass free? Wei Wei Bai looked at him for a while before sighing. If you can release my husband, we will be loyal to you in the future. We'll be your servants and palace maids. Ning Jiuma saw the fear in her eyes. It was as if she already knew about her idiot husband. Chapter 16:14. Actually, it was just her wishful thinking. Ning Jiuma pretended not to see her final struggle. He knew that he couldn't force her to admit it. He and that fool were the same person. So Ning Jiuma smiled. If you show your loyalty now, it'll be better than suffering outside if you really become my servant or palace maid in the future. Forget it. If you show your loyalty, I'll reluctantly accept you and that fool. She wasn't willing to face it yet. He could only spoil her. Because Bai Wei drank wine, the smell of alcohol rose, and her body softly lay on the table. The peach blossoms outside the window flew in and landed on her hair. Ning Jiuma couldn't help but reach out to take it away. But he heard her mutter, Your Highness, Your Highness." Her tone was indescribably sad. Ning Jiuma lowered his eyes and quietly pinched the petal. In the end, he liked fools more. But if he continued to be a fool, who would protect them? There were so many man-eating beasts in the palace. He couldn't be a fool. Suddenly, he groaned and a mouthful of blood spilled from the corner of his mouth. Wei Wei Bai was half drunk and about to fall asleep when she heard his painful groans. She immediately opened her eyes and saw Ning Jiuma spitting out a large mouthful of blood. Wei Wei Bai hurriedly got up and immediately carried him to the bed and put him down. Then she shouted, Something happened to His Highness." Zheng Quan came in and was shocked, but he knew what was going on. He immediately said, "Miss, don't shout. His Highness is poisoned." With that, Zheng Quan stuffed a red pill into Ning Jiuma's mouth. Ning Jiuma's breathing was better, but there were still traces of pain between his brows. Wei Wei Bai held his hand tightly. His fingers were so cold that she started to tremble. What's going on? Why is this happening? Who poisoned him? Ning Jiuma was still enduring the pain and didn't make a sound. Zheng Quan couldn't help but sigh. His Highness is also a pitiful person. He became a fool after being poisoned. To wake himself up, he ate another kind of poison to suppress it. But if this continues, his body won't be able to take it. This was the truth, and it sounded extremely cruel. Wei Wei Bai's lips trembled. Is he stupid? Zheng Qiao also knew what His Highness was thinking, so she went with the flow and told her. Yes, he became a fool when the poison took effect. Later, When the Empress wanted to kill him, he could only eat poison to suppress the poison and then recover his mind to fight again. Wei Wei Bai's eyes began to turn red. She seemed to be in disbelief, but she had to believe it. She could only hold his hand and say in a hoarse voice, "Your Highness? Your Highness." It was indescribably pitiful and lost. Ning Jioma grunted a few times. After taking the medicine, his face finally looked better. "What? Isn't your Highness that idiot?" Wei Wei Bai bit her lip. Her eyes were as red as a rabbit's, and her body was trembling. Ning Jioma burst out laughing. "All right, I'm just lying to you. There's no such thing as an antidote. I thought I was writing a script. Why are you so gullible?" A tear fell onto the back of his hand. Ning Jioma was stunned, but he saw that her face was full of tears. She was crying so hard that even her breathing was messed up. She was sobbing like a child. Ning Jioma didn't know why, but his heart ached. He just wanted her to face the fact that he was the same person whether he was stupid or not. But when he saw her so sad, he couldn't feel happy. Ning Jioma reached out and pulled her into his arms. "Don't cry," he said in a hoarse voice. "Don't cry, I'm fine." / Chapter 16:15. Wei Wei Bai sobbed, but didn't say anything. Ning Jioma's eyes were a little dry. He said, "What's so good about being a fool? I'm dirty and rolling on the ground. I don't even fight back when I'm beaten. Only you want me to be a fool. What's wrong with your brain? How can a fool give you happiness?" Wei Wei Bai grabbed the clothes on his chest and didn't say anything. Ning Jioma sighed. "If I lose the battle, I might really be a fool for the rest of my life. You'll be happy then." Wei Wei Bai didn't answer. She just hugged him. She was afraid that he would be gone. She even hugged him until it hurt. Ning Jioma knew that she must have suffered a big blow. He reached out and touched her satin-like hair, his eyes dark. He forced her to look at him step by step. It wasn't easy to look at him. Didn't her heart ache? Wei Wei Bai suddenly asked softly, "Isn't there an antidote?" Ning Jioma immediately heaved a sigh of relief. The joy of his plan, succeeding, made the corners of his mouth rise. She really couldn't let go of him. He immediately suppressed his smile and pretended to be in pain. "There is an antidote. It's in the hands of the person who poisoned me." Look at how miserable he was. Everyone wanted to kill him. Ning Jioma suppressed his smug smile and desperately acted pitiful. Wei Wei Bai's heart ached for him. Even the strength of her hug became gentle. Ning Jioma's expression also became gentle. He lowered his head and looked at her. His eyes were like stars falling. There was a different kind of purity and clarity. He thought that he liked her. He liked her very much. Ding! The male lead's favorability is at 70. Suddenly, outside the door, Zhang Qiao risked being beaten and said carefully, "Your Highness, His Majesty summons you." Ning Jioma heard this and thought that it was about the concubine. But no, it was a summons, not an imperial edict. His eyes turned cold. "What's wrong?" Zhang Qiao said, "His Majesty's head eunuch personally invited you and said that you will go with the girl." Ning Jioma felt uneasy. He would go with Wei Wei Bai. It must be about the concubine. However, this was something that could be settled with an imperial edict. Why would he go personally? The emperor's body was in such a bad state that he didn't do much at all. It was not the dog-like emperor style to mobilize so many people for his concubine. Could it be that the empress is up to something again? Ning Jioma hid his gloominess between his brows, and his face was a little sharp. He said softly, "Okay, I'll bring Wei over." Wei Wei Bai looked up in confusion. Her eyes were still red, and there were traces of tears at the corners of her eyes. Ning Jioma couldn't help but reach out and wipe away the tears at the corner of her eyes. "Do you want to come with me? If you go, you will be my concubine. I will not force you." Wei Wei Bai was a little hesitant, as if she was struggling with something. She liked to silly him. Now that he was no longer a fool, she hesitated and did not dare to like him anymore. Ning Jioma saw through her thoughts. He suddenly reached out and clutched his chest, looking like he was about to vomit blood. Wei Wei Bai immediately tugged at his sleeve nervously. "Your Highness." Ning Jioma's face was pale. "You should leave. I know you are unwilling. When Father blames you, he will just chop off my head. It has nothing to do with you." These words were said so shamelessly. It was simply like a white lotus flower, and it was the black lotus type. Wei Wei Bai and the system that was eating snacks calmly watched him act. She really wanted to say, "Your Highness, take care. I will leave first. Go ahead and chop off your head." However, for the sake of favorability, Wei Wei Bai could only do it with him. She immediately couldn't bear to frown and hesitated. "It's so serious. Then let's go together." And Chapter 16:16. Ning Juma trembled and wanted to laugh. There were benefits to being stupid. It was so satisfying to lie to her. Wei Wei Bai sighed. Her acting skills were getting worse with each generation. Even if she wanted to laugh, she should wait until she succeeded before hiding and laughing alone. She thought that he couldn't tell. He had his back to her, and his smile was about to reach the back of his head. She was so happy that she became a fool. The two of them changed their clothes. Wei Wei Bai was still wearing the pink and blue palace dress. Before she was conferred the title, she was just a palace maid. Ning Jioma's clothes were more complicated. When Wei Wei Bai walked out, he was still looking for a belt. She picked up the belt on the plate out of habit and walked to him. "Stand properly," she said calmly. Ning Jioma immediately stood properly and looked at her with a smile. Wei Wei Bai didn't say anything. She lowered her head seriously and helped him fasten the belt. He looked at the top of her head. A simple jade hairpin tied her hair into a bun, and her extra long hair fell behind her back. She was as delicate and pretty as a green willow by the water. Ning Jioma saw the newly bloomed begonia flowers beside her. He picked one casually and put it in her bun. Wei Wei Bai finished fastening the belt and looked up in confusion. The red begonia flowers were like the blush on her face, cute and charming. Ning Jioma looked at her, and a thought appeared in his mind. She was like a flower too. He couldn't wait to hold her in his hands and hide her in his sleeves. Ning Jioma slowly held her hand and said softly, "Don't be nervous later. It's your first time meeting the Emperor. I'll speak for you. He's not a good person. You don't have to care about that old bastard." These words were directed at the imperial father that he was referring to. He was simply an old tortoise with a vicious heart. He let her out, and the lanterns were lit all the way. They were going to sit in the sedan chair, but Ning Jioma refused. He held Wei Wei Bai's hand and walked to the emperor's bedroom. The eunuchs and palace maids followed behind. Along the way, Ning Jioma patiently introduced her to the palaces on the road. And which place in the palace couldn't they go? Under the light, she stared at him curiously. Ning Jioma was mesmerized by her gaze. If it weren't for the crowd, he would have lowered his head and kissed her. "Your Highness, you really know a lot." Wei Wei Bai lowered her head in embarrassment under his gaze. She lowered her eyes and said softly. Ning Jioma paused. She had praised him. She had always been nice to him when he was in a daze, but she finally softened her attitude towards him when he was sober. With his mood lifted, Ning Jioma felt that everything was good. He turned around and said, "Turn your back." All the eunuchs and palace maids stopped in their tracks and immediately turned around. Wei Wei Bai also turned around, and a warm kiss fell on her lips. She was stunned for a moment, but he had already left. His eyes were filled with joy. "Of course I know a lot. Follow me in the future, and I'll teach you every day." Wei Wei Bai pursed her lips as a trace of hesitation appeared in her eyes. In the end, she softly replied, "Yes, Your Highness." Ning Jioma knew that she was going to stay in the palace with him. "Follow me and stay in the palace for the rest of your life." Okay. He suddenly felt that the future was no longer dark, even if there were swords and knives on his body. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 80. The youth didn't know the taste of love. Once they met, the depth of their love would be unknown. The emperor's bedroom was brightly lit, and the palace maids and eunuchs were all on alert. It seemed like they were welcoming someone. When Ning Jioma held Wei Wei Bai's hand and came here, he instinctively felt that something was wrong. The palace had actually been specially cleaned. Chapter 16:17. There were peach blossoms of the season everywhere, as well as all kinds of rare and beautiful things. It was as if they were welcoming an important guest. Could it be that the Dog Emperor had an important guest tonight? Ning Jioma's heart was filled with all kinds of thoughts, but he suppressed them all. There was only a smile on his lips like a spring breeze. He led Wei Wei Bai into the palace. He saw the emperor sitting on the chair with his back straight. His hair seemed to have been dyed, without a single strand of white hair. Because the emperor was cultivating, his hair was always disheveled. But now his hair was tied up. He was clean and wore casual clothes, but they were of a very young style. The black cuffs were embroidered with patterns. Under the light, the old emperor looked 10 years younger. If he didn't know that the pills had eaten away his body, Ning Jiuma thought that he had really succeeded in cultivating. "Father, I'm here to greet you. This is Wei Wei." Ning Jiuma pulled Wei Wei by and knelt down together. Ning Jiuma knelt in front, half of his body blocking Wei Wei by, protecting her behind him. He said softly, "Wei Wei, greet father." Wei Wei looked up and suddenly saw pink petals flying all over the sky. Her head was going to hurt again, and her eyes were going to go blind again. The system said the love of the emperor, 1,000 years of love, a love that will never change for 10,000 years. Wei Wei said, "If you say any more, I'll kill myself." What kind of love of the emperor was this? It attracted an old man. She refused, but the love of the emperor couldn't be turned off. She looked up, and her mouth twitched. Finally, she forced herself to call out, "Father." The old emperor's body trembled, his fingers gripping the armrest of the chair tightly, as if he was enduring something. His eyes fell on her pink and young face, and all kinds of intense struggle and pain flashed across his face. Finally, the old emperor said softly, "Wei Wei." Ning Jiuma's eyebrows jumped. Why did he feel that the dog emperor's voice was not right? He looked up and stole a glance, but saw that the dog emperor's eyes were fixed on Wei Wei Bai. His eyes were filled with tenderness and tenderness. Ning Jiuma was a man who had just fallen in love. How could he not understand the naked look in her eyes? His pupils constricted, and he instinctively blocked Wei Wei Bai. He then said loudly, "Imperial Father, this son remembers that there is still something I have to do. I will take my leave first." With that, Ning Jiuma grabbed Wei Wei Bai's hand and immediately got up to leave. But behind him, the old emperor coldly said, "Halt." Ning Jiuma's eyes darkened. His murderous aura burst out, but he forced himself to endure. He couldn't help but tighten his grip on Wei Wei Bai's hand. Wei Wei Bai frowned. It hurt a little. The emperor suddenly spoke softly, "Mo, which girl do you like? I'll help you find her. You don't like the prime minister's daughter, but do you like the princess?" Ning Jiuma finally turned around. His eyes were a little red. Then, he pulled Wei Wei Bai behind him. He was thin, but very slender. He blocked the petite Wei Wei Bai behind him, not revealing a trace of light. If Ning Jiuma still couldn't see the desire in the old emperor's eyes, he would have lived in vain. If it was someone else, he might have laughed out loud. This dog emperor cultivated immortality every day to the point where he didn't recognize anyone. Although he doted on a few concubines, this dog emperor really didn't have any feelings for women. In the end, he really fell in love with a woman. He could use her, but this woman was Wei Wei Bai. He couldn't wait to gouge out the old emperor's eyes. Slash. Chapter 1618. Ning Jiuma's expression turned cold. Under the flickering candlelight, he looked exceptionally sinister. He said word by word, "Father, I don't like other women." He held her hand and started to sweat. He wanted to ascend the throne and couldn't offend this dog emperor. One wrong step and his path to the throne would collapse. But looking at the emperor's red and wolf-like eyes, he thought of his gaze falling on the little palace made behind him. The hatred and crazed bloodlust that he had been suppressing surged to his head. He could make use of anyone in this palace, but he wouldn't use her as a stepping stone, and he wouldn't let other men look at her. This dog emperor took away everything from him, and he wanted to take away the only person in the palace who was good to him. The emperor's expression changed. He looked at Ning Jiuma gloomily. "Are you going to rebel against me?" Ning Jiuma gritted his teeth, and the taste of blood spread in his mouth. Wei Wei Bai seemed to want to come out from behind him. He immediately turned around and said in a low voice, "Don't talk. Stay here obediently." Wei Wei Bai trembled and looked at him with a trace of confusion. She didn't seem to understand why they were at loggerheads. Ning Jiuma hoped that she didn't know anything. He didn't even dare to bet that if she knew that the emperor liked her, she would leave with him. Power was so tempting. The emperor had the best of everything. Which woman wouldn't be tempted? Even this dog emperor could be her father. The emperor saw him scolding Wei Wei Bai and got up angrily. He slammed the table and shouted, "Ning Jiuma, you're rebelling." Ning Jiuma turned around and immediately lowered his head and said respectfully, "Father, it's late. I won't disturb your rest. I'll leave with secondary consort Bai." He knew it was wrong. He knew that he should appease this old dog. But Ning Jiuma hated him so much that his eyes were about to bleed. He would have pulled out his sword and killed this dog emperor. Who would dare to covet his woman? Ning Jiuma held Wei Wei Bai's hand tightly and retreated step by step. He was as vigilant as a wolf guarding a treasure. He refused to let the emperor see Wei Wei Bai. Even one glance was too much. Then he retreated a dozen steps, turned around, grabbed Wei Wei Bai into his arms, and dragged her out. It was as if he was afraid that someone would snatch away his little palace maid. Wei Wei Bai whispered, "Your Highness." Her innocent look made Ning Jiuma furious. Do not make a sound. He had already provoked someone he shouldn't have, yet he still didn't know how to keep a low profile. Did she take a fancy to that old dog? Wei Wei Bai blinked her eyes as if she didn't understand what was going on between the father and son. Even if he knew, he had to pretend that he didn't. Ning Jiuma's eyes were as cold as knives. The emperor suddenly whispered, "Immerse, do you want to be the crown prince?" Ning Jiuma stopped in his tracks. He hugged Wei Wei Bai, his eyes fierce and sinister. His thin red lips were tightly pursed, as if he was pursing blood. His voice was cold and slow, with a frosty sharpness. "Your son doesn't dare." After that, he didn't even turn his head and said calmly, "Your son will take his leave. Father, you can rest in peace." Ning Jiuma hurriedly pulled Wei Wei Bai and quickened his pace. The eunuchs and palace maids behind him couldn't keep up with his pace. When they returned to their own palace, Ning Jiuma turned around fiercely. "Get lost." Zhang Kuang wanted to serve them when he saw them return, but when he saw this, he immediately changed his mind. He immediately retreated with all the servants. The door was closed. Ning Jiuma pulled the dazed Wei Wei Bai and pushed her onto the bed. // Chapter 1619. His expression was dark and cold as he pressed down on her. He held both her hands with one hand and her chin with the other. "Where did you hook up with this person? Tell me. Why did that dog of an emperor suddenly fancy her? Was it because they had already fallen for each other?" Wei Wei Bai was in a daze. Her dazed eyes turned slowly before she looked at him strangely. What's wrong? She couldn't possibly say that the old emperor had suddenly become horny because of the love of the emperor. Ning Jiuma laughed coldly. What's wrong? Then his cold laugh turned into anger. Did you see that just now? That old dog looked at you as if he wanted to eat you up. He actually wants you. Wei Wei Bai was stunned. Then she forced a smile. How is that possible? I've never seen him before. Also, I'm not that kind of beautiful woman. How could the emperor suddenly fancy me? Ning Jiuma reached out and pinched her face. His eyes were red as he gritted his teeth and said, Not beautiful enough. You're not beautiful enough. How could that dog of an emperor give me the position of crown prince in exchange for you? Tell me, aren't you beautiful? Wei Wei Bai's face turned red from the pinch. She said vaguely, Let go of me, Ning Jiuma. Ning Jiuma frowned. Oh, Ning Jiuma, did you fancy that dog of an emperor? You're not even calling him Your Highness and are calling him by his name? Wei Wei Bai couldn't stand this guy's childishness. She pushed him away with one hand. Ning Jiuma was pushed to the side of the bed by her great strength and almost rolled off the bed. He quickly supported himself and glared at her. Wei Wei Bai, you push me. Is it because you feel wrong to be my concubine that you want to be the imperial concubine? Bai Weiwei slammed her hand on the bed rail, and it snapped with a snap. Ning Jiuma's eyebrows jumped. This violent and direct strength. Was she an elephant? Wei Wei Bai was so angry that blood rushed her face. What's wrong with you? I went with you to see that old bastard. From the beginning to the end, other than calling him imperial father, I didn't say anything else. Who did I hook up with? How did I hook up with him? Why don't you tell me? What could Ning Jiuma say? How would he know how that old bastard fell for Wei Wei Bai? Yes, the little palace maid was the cutest girl in the entire palace. But that old bastard must be sick in the head. How could he see her cuteness right away? Then, he would snatch it from him. Ning Jima looked at Wei Wei Bai. He couldn't win against her in a fight, but he couldn't win against her either. He was so angry that he pouted like a frog. Let's talk about it later. For now on, stay here and don't go out. But he wanted to take her out to meet someone. Even the emperor was seduced by her. If he took her out a few more times, his love rivals would have circled the palace 100 times. Wei Wei Bai sneered. Why? Am I a palace maid, or am I your prisoner? I can't even go out? At most, I won't be a palace maid anymore. I can go out of the palace and farm to support myself. Ning Jiama felt that she was speaking the truth. Her strength was comparable to that of a few cows. Farming was definitely a piece of cake for her. Ning Jiama's expression turned cold. He couldn't suppress the fierceness in his chest. How dare you? I am your master. You have to agree to whatever I say. Wei Wei Bai held her forehead helplessly. What kind of straight man was he talking about? With this kind of conduct, he really wanted to chase after girls. Girls would probably be scared away. No matter how handsome he was, he wouldn't be able to stand such a waste. She refused to talk to this man. She was afraid that her IQ would plummet. Wei Wei Bai, I don't know what's wrong with you. Calm down yourself. I'm going to sleep in the next room. //. Chapter 16:20. How old was that old bastard? He still had the cheek to want Wei Wei Bai. He and Wei Wei Bai were a match made in heaven. Their ages were just right, and they were equally good-looking. What did that old bastard have? Just because of the dragon throne? Ning Jiama had never had such a strong urge to kill his father. He got up and covered Wei Wei Bai with a blanket. Then he kissed her hair. It seemed that he could still smell the begonia scent from last night. After he walked out, Zhang Qiao hurried over. Your Highness, bad news. The imperial edict is here. Ning Jiama's eyes narrowed. His footsteps were heavy as he walked out slowly. It was the emperor's head eunuch. He held the imperial edict and smiled gently. I am here on His Majesty's orders. Your Highness King Ning, please accept the edict. Ning Jiama felt that it couldn't be the concubine's order. That old bastard was going to snatch it. He pinched his fingers tightly and knelt down expressionlessly. The head eunuch opened the imperial edict and said a lot of nonsense. Finally, he said, Palace made by, beautiful on the outside but intelligent on the inside. She has a gentle temperament and is upright and dignified. She comforts my heart and is conferred the title of imperial concubine. Ning Jiama slowly looked up. His face was expressionless, but there was killing intent in his eyes. The corners of his eyes were slightly red and cold. The head eunuch finished announcing the edict. Your Highness, accept the edict. Ning Jiama slowly got up and reached out to grab the imperial edict. He was very calm, as if he would obediently do as he was told. The head eunuch also heaved a sigh of relief. His Majesty said that you will be in charge of conferring concubines. Your Highness, if you handle this well, your future will be limitless. After he finished speaking, he smiled and left. Ning Jiama looked up at the back view of the eunuch. His eyes were cold. He said softly, Zhang Qiao, burn it. Zhang Qiao immediately knelt down. Your Highness, don't be impulsive. It wasn't easy for us to get to this point. As long as you become the crown prince, you'll have a chance to snatch her back in the future. He felt that it was ridiculous. Why did the emperor suddenly like Wei Wei Bai? Even if a palace maid was likable, this was not the way to like her. In an instant, she had gone from a palace maid to a concubine. She was just one step away from becoming a consort. No matter how muddle-headed the emperor was, he had never acted so recklessly. He didn't even ask for the empress's permission before he issued the order. This was simply insane. But this madman is the emperor. If he burns the imperial edict with the accusation of disrespect, everything that His Highness had planned would be ruined. Ning Jiama lowered his head. Do you want me to give up on her? Zheng Ting's lips trembled, but he still tried his best to persuade him. As long as we can hold on for a while longer, we will have a chance. You will become the crown prince and suppress the empress. Then, you can think of a way to make the emperor's poison act up. The court will still be yours. Ning Jiuma's eyes were dark and gloomy. There was an indescribable, deathly stillness in them. You're right. This is the best and safest way. I've already put in so much effort. One wrong move, and I'll lose everything. Zheng Kuang thought that he had thought it through. No matter how cute the little palace maid was, she couldn't compare to Jiang Shan. Ning Jiuma suddenly said, "But there's a faster way." Zheng Ting hugged Ning Jiuma's thigh and said with a trembling body, "This is the last way. We can't take it." How could he not understand His Highness's words? He wanted to rebel directly. They had been planning for so long. How could they take such a risky path? They had been trembling in fear for so many years just to be able to rightfully take the throne. They didn't want to bear the infamy and directly rebel. Ning Jiuma was silent for a while. Then, he suddenly smiled and kicked Zheng Ting away. Slash. Chapter 16:21. His expression was cold as he threw the imperial edict in his hand to his feet. "Burn it to ashes, don't let me see it. I don't want a throne now, I want that old bastard's life." He had endured for so long, and he had come this far step by step. He could give anything, and he could compromise on anything. But that dog of an emperor had to step on his bottom line. If he retreated, he would be a coward even if he got the throne. Ning Jiuma walked back and said coldly, "If I rely on selling her to get the throne, then this empire is meaningless to me." Zheng Xiao sat there in a daze. Crazy, they were all crazy. The emperor was crazy, so was Ning Wang. Once the path of rebellion was taken, there was no turning back. Rebelling in this situation was simply suicide. Wasn't Ning Wang able to use anything in the past? Why was it that he couldn't bear to part with Wei Wei Bai? Wei Wei Bai had just woken up and felt sore all over. The system said gloomily, "Your little retard is rebelling." Wei Wei Bai was still sleepy. Doesn't he want to rebel every day? Ning Jiuma was thinking about rebelling every day. That was nothing new. The system said, "That old bastard came with an imperial edict asking you to be his concubine." The male lead is angry, so he didn't take the path of scheming anymore. He's already preparing to force you to abdicate. Wei Wei Bai said, "Only 85 favorability points. This little fool doesn't even want his life anymore." It was hard to believe how stubborn this guy was to have 100 favorability points. The system said, maybe he was abused too much and felt that his life was dark. A little light could make him live and die together. Wei Wei Bai said, "You make me sound like a light bulb. Once this rebellion happens, my favorability points and the position of empress will be gone." Men always regretted it after doing it. Ning Jiuma had been scheming for so many years, and he could have gotten the throne smoothly. But because of her, he directly rebelled. Now, the rebellion would not succeed. So if he failed, he would probably take her out of the palace. After all, the dog hole in the cold palace was still there. But what about out of the palace? Would Ning Jiuma regret giving up his empire for beauty? Men were all demons who didn't mean what they said. After getting angry for a beauty, most people would regret it at some point. If he regretted it, his favorable impression of him would definitely drop. Once it dropped, not to mention the side quest, even a main quest would be finished. Wei Wei Bai calmly thought about what to do next. Then she said, "Now is not a good time to rebel. We need to give him some time to think." The system sat on the red string and swung. "How do you want to be quiet?" Wei Wei Bai, "Be his stepmother." Was this Jingjing? "I feel like the male lead will calm you down." "Host, if you want to cause trouble, just say so." Ning Jiuma entered the room with his hands behind his back and saw Wei Wei Bai sitting on the bed. Her hair was messy and her face was blank. Although she was good at taking care of him, she couldn't take care of herself. Ning Jiuma reached out to take her dress and immediately helped her put on without giving her a chance to speak. He didn't show the slightest bit of uneasiness or murderous intent. He calmly put a green cloak on her and put a hood on her. Wei Wei Bai looked at him strangely. "What's wrong?" Ning Jiuma, leaving the palace. Wei Wei Bai was stunned and then frowned. "Why so sudden?" Ning Jiuma smiled and lowered his head to kiss her lips. "It's sudden. I suddenly feel like it's a very good thing to go farming with you. You go first. I'll pack up the gold, silver, and jewelry and then follow you out." Wei Wei Bai grabbed his wrist, her eyes cold. What happened? You haven't found the antidote yet. Are you going to wait for death outside the palace? Chapter 1622. You can search Transmigration System. Prince Charming, come over to search book www.sashu.com on Baidu to find the. He knew that she wouldn't believe him so easily. Ning Jiuma's eyes softened. I found the antidote, so I plan to leave the palace with you. I feel that there's no point in staying in the palace. It's better to go out and be free. This reason made her loosen up a little. Ning Jiuma reached out and hugged her. In a place where she couldn't see, his eyes were dark. His tone was light. Let's go out of the palace, get married, farm, and have a chubby baby. Wei Wei Bai. You're too indecent. Ning Jiuma. Can you give birth to a baby properly? He stroked her abdomen. Maybe there's already a chubby baby here. Wei Wei Bai. You're wrong. You can't give birth, not in this lifetime. If you really want to give birth, you can choose between the system and the pillow boy. Ning Jiuma rambled on and on about the beautiful scenes of leaving the palace. In the end, he almost believed that he could leave the palace with her. But he knew that this world belonged to the person on the throne. If they didn't kill him, they wouldn't be able to escape no matter how big the world was. Ning Jiuma's eyes turned red. He said, "Wait for me to find you." Wei Wei Bai seemed to be convinced by him. She said gently, "Okay, I'll wait for you." Ning Jiuma took a deep breath and forced himself to let go of her. Then he said, "Zheng Xiao." Zheng Xiao ran over with a bitter face with a bag. Ning Jiuma pushed Wei Wei Bai. "Go, I'll catch up soon." Wei Wei Bai hesitated and turned back, only to see his smiling face and bright eyes. His youthful aura made him energetic. She wasn't confused anymore. She tilted her head and said to him, "Hurry up and catch up, Your Highness." Ning Jiuma smiled and nodded. "Okay." Wei Wei Bai also walked out without hesitation. Where a figure disappeared, Ning Jiuma's legs went soft and he sat on the ground. He reached out to cover his face. There were no tears, but his eyes were empty and violent. If he could leave the palace, it would be a good place to go. This palace had taken away too many things from him. Now that the most important person to him was gone, he had no qualms about starting a massacre here. Ning Jiuma slowly got up and was about to leave when he spat out a mouthful of blood. He felt a dull pain in his head. He knew that he was going to be a fool again. With trembling fingers, he stuffed the red pill into his mouth. The poison flared up more and more frequently. Ning Jiuma didn't care at all. After taking the medicine, he laboriously got up and walked out to arrange the following matters. Zheng Yi led Wei Wei Bai and trembled. What should they do? How could a direct rebellion succeed? Wei Wei Bai asked, "Grandpa, are you cold?" "It's not cold, it's not cold." Bai Wei Wei looked at him with an indifferent expression, and he was a little scared. She suddenly smiled. "We're going the wrong way." Zheng Kuang said, "That's right. It's the way to the cold palace. Although the dog hole is blocked, it's not solid. If you want to use it, you can still dig it out." Wei Wei Bai pointed at the palace behind her. "That's where I should be." Zheng Kuang was stunned. Wasn't that the emperor's palace? Wei Wei Bai turned around and looked into the distance expressionlessly. "Let's go." Zheng Kuang immediately knelt down and said anxiously, "Miss, if you go, His Highness will definitely cut me into pieces." Wei Wei Bai said, "If I escape, His Highness will definitely be cut into pieces by that old emperor. Is this the time to joke around? I heard everything when you guys were announcing the decree." Zheng Kuang trembled. He didn't expect Wei Wei Bai to know everything. Wei Wei Bai said, "Just stay by my side. You don't have to go back." / Chapter 1624. Or was it really a family trait? He suddenly realized that the mentally retarded were really cute. Ning Jiuma spread out the map of the palace. His eyes were red as he coughed and planned how to kill his father and usurp the throne. Suddenly, a little eunuch rushed in and fell to the ground, trembling all over. "Your Highness, His Majesty held 100-flower banquet." Ning Jiuma sneered. "Just nice, we can catch them all in one go." Little eunuch, the young lady, is also there. Ning Jiuma was confused. "What young lady?" "Little eunuch. Tonight's 100-flower banquet is prepared for the young lady to celebrate her becoming a concubine. After hesitating, the little eunuch added, "The young lady went there willingly." Ning Jiumal was stunned for a moment. Suddenly, his vision turned black. The brush in his hand fell to the ground, and the ink stained the map black. He asked softly, "Say it again." "Little eunuch, the young lady went there willingly." Ning Jiumal slowly looked up and then gently curled his lips. He repeated, "Willingly? She willingly. Willingly to be that old man's concubine, willingly to stay in the palace, but abandon him?" The little eunuch felt that His Highness's expression was very scary. Ning Jiumal lowered his head and looked at the ink-stained map. He stretched out his finger and slowly wiped the ink-stained areas. He wiped so seriously that his finger was stained black by the ink, and the map was also ruined. He suddenly laughed and then grabbed the map in his hand and slowly tore it. Behind the torn paper was his crazy and sinister eyes. He said softly, "Wei Wei Bai, do you have to do this to me?" Ning Jiumal threw the map away and put his hands on the table. He lowered his head and said coldly, "Go and prepare." The little eunuch was a little slow to react. "Your Highness." Ning Jiumal threw a paperweight over. "Go and prepare clothes. I'm going to attend that old man's 100-flower banquet." Except for the Empress, everyone in the harem was a concubine. The little eunuch immediately left after surviving the disaster. Ning Jiumal stood there in a daze for a long time and was at a loss. He staggered a few steps and slowly walked out. In the empty palace, the decorations were gorgeous, and the begonia flowers were blooming beautifully. Ning Jiumal looked around in a daze, but he couldn't see anything. He suddenly felt a little cold. He struggled to sit on the chair and felt his limbs go soft. His eyes gradually became numb and hopeless. The traces of blood in his body were also covered by a kind of cold seriousness. In this palace, he was still alone. Suddenly, Ning Jiumal glanced sideways at the dagger on the table. He stood up, picked up the dagger, and stuffed it into his sleeve. If she dared to leave, he would rather kill her than let her marry the old emperor. Wei Wei Bai lowered her head and sewed the clothes. She had started sewing the clothes when Ning Jiumal was in a daze. The emperor sat far away, separated by a white line. "Wei Wei Bai, men and women shouldn't touch each other. Don't cross this line." The emperor hurriedly nodded. "Yes, Wei Wei." Wei Wei Bai said, "That crown prince molested me. He's not a good person. I don't want to see him." That retarded crown prince heard that he had obtained the antidote, so his spirit was much better. The emperor's expression changed. "That unfilial son is no longer the crown prince. I have already abolished him." It wasn't the first time that the crown prince had molested an imperial concubine. When he thought that his beloved would be bullied, the emperor immediately said, "I'll find a reason to kill that unfilial son." Wei Wei Bai looked at the pink petals that only she could see. /say button. Chapter 1625. These were not the petals of the emperor's love. These were just powders of IQ reduction. Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but ask the system, will the so-called emperor's love cause one's IQ to drop so much? The system said, those who fall in love are all fools. This prize was made with that as the basis. Wei Wei Bai said, that's too stupid. He was even more stupid than Ning Jiumal when he was stupid. She was so obedient that she was embarrassed to mistreat the old man. Wei Wei Bai wanted to test the bottom line of the emperor's IQ and said softly, I think King Ning is not bad. When the emperor heard this, his old tears almost fell. I know you don't love me. You only love him, I won't ask you for anything. I just want you to stay by my side. I will give you everything you want. Every time he saw her, he felt that she was the most beautiful woman in the world. He even felt that he must have owed her in his previous life. So in this life, he would use everything he had to repay her. Wei Wei Bai was sure that the emperor had lost his IQ. His brain was filled with pink petals. So Wei Wei Bai reached out and asked him for the antidote to the poison in Ning Jiumal's body. The emperor immediately took out a small bottle. It was said that this thing was very difficult to refine. It was a real tonic. The emperor was a little guilty. This is all for now. I will give you more in the future. He had been taking pills for so many years, and his body was still able to hold on because of this. The Empress begged for a long time and only got 2 pills. Wei Wei Bai weighed the bottle. There were about 7 or 8 pills in it. It was very good for Ning Jiuma's body condition. The Empress saw her weighing the bottle and thought that she was not satisfied. She immediately said, "I promise to give you 1 bottle every month. I still have 3 bottles with me." He was afraid that she would only stay by his side for the medicine, so he could only humbly give her a few bottles of medicine to delay her departure. The Emperor had really become a role model who would give up everything for his lover. Wei Wei Bai was very touched. She silently drew the white line further away from the old Emperor so that he was 3 meters away from her. Ugly, still rejected. When the Emperor went to attend the banquet, he was still talking about when he would depose the Empress and make her the Empress. Wei Wei Bai felt that she was going to die soon. If the Empress heard this, she would probably come and hack her to death. But I heard that the Emperor has started to deal with the Empress's family. Wei Wei Bai expressed that the system's products were simply divine tools for brainwashing. She wore the clothes of a concubine, and the golden bell that Ning Jiuma had given her was tied around her waist. She walked to the Emperor's side. The 100-flower feast was held in the Imperial Garden, and it just so happened that the garden was full of flowers. When Ning Jiuma arrived, he happened to see Wei Wei Bai standing in a high spot. She was wearing the pink formal dress of an imperial concubine. The hemline of her dress was wide and gorgeous. Her hair was tied up in a bun with a golden hairpin in it. Under the hanging vines, half of her face was as pink as snow. Her eyes were cold, and her every move was full of flirtatious charm. She seemed to have sensed his gaze and lowered her head to meet his. Wei Wei Bai seemed to be stunned. She hesitated for a moment and seemed to want to continue walking. But the Emperor suddenly walked out from beside her. He lowered his head and said something to her. Wei Wei Bai's attention was drawn over. When she heard the Emperor's words, she couldn't help but smile. The Emperor said, "Wei Wei, I will make him the crown prince later. Do you like it?" Wei Wei Bai said softly, "You decide. As long as you stay away from me." The Emperor immediately cheered up. He felt that by Wei Wei Bai's side, she was the only one in his mind. /save button. Chapter 16:26. You can search Transmigration System. Prince Charming, come to search book www. Sashu, come in Baidu to find the S. He didn't even know how to be jealous anymore. Bai Weiwei felt that the old Emperor's state was similar to that of someone who had taken ecstasy. Suddenly, she felt a chill run down her spine. She turned around and saw Ning Jiuma's eyes were like dark clouds, extremely violent. The favorability didn't drop, but Ning Jiuma was obviously turning black. The system reminded her, he has a knife on him. After he stabs the old Emperor to death, he'll throw the cup and let his henchmen in ambush kill everyone. Ning Jiuma was going all out. He wanted to stop Wei Wei Bai from marrying the old Emperor, even if he had to die. Wei Wei Bai asked, "The one who will kill everyone, including me?" The system said, looking at him, "He'll probably stab you first." Of course, the adulterous couple had to be killed together. The system picked up its snacks. Ah, what a depraved and inhumane drama of father and son cuckolding each other and killing each other. Wei Wei Bai, Ning Jiuma was still staring at her. She felt the dark gaze of death. Then, Wei Wei Bai turned around silently and walked back. The system said, "Host, don't run away. You're the main character." The male lead had already shown his knife, but the host ran away. This love triangle was incomplete. Wei Wei Bai said, "I'm going to the toilet." Ning Jiuma's terrifying gaze scared the hell out of her. The old Emperor was still happily dethroning the crown prince and announcing Ning Jiuma as the crown prince. When Ning Jiuma heard his name, he slowly walked over and knelt down to receive the decree. The Emperor's expression didn't look good. He smiled coldly. "Take it well, Mo-er. This is her existence, which is why you can come to this point. She will be your mother in the future. You must respect her." Ning Jiuma lowered his head and held the decree in his hands. The thing that he once wanted the most was now the heaviest humiliation. He lifted his eyelids, revealing a pair of cold eyes. He said softly, "Your son obeys the decree. Your son will, of course, respect my mother." The word mother was said softly and slowly. It was indescribably strange. The emperor looked at the empress. The empress's face was cold. He thought of his sweetheart. She was still waiting for him to get rid of everything and put her on the throne of the empress. The emperor didn't look at Ning Jiuma. What he needed the most now was how to kill the empress. Ning Jiuma also silently retreated and then turned to leave. He firmly remembered the direction she left in. It was not too late to chase after her now. After Wei Wei Bai has satisfied her physiological needs, she lifts her gorgeous but cumbersome dress and walks to the corridor. The system suddenly said, "The male lead is coming with a knife." Wei Wei Bai, then she turned her head and saw Ning Jiuma rushing over aggressively from the end of the corridor. Every step he took was heavy. His clothes fluttered in the wind. His incomparably cold face carried a murderous aura. He felt that the triads were here to collect debts. Wei Wei Bai suddenly broke into a run. The system said, "Why are you running so fast? Explain to him that you have nothing to do with the old emperor." The old emperor was purified into a fool by Plato's smile. He was satisfied with Wei Wei Bai and couldn't think of anything else. Wei Wei Bai said, "Did you see Ning Jiuma's eyes? Without waiting for me to explain, he'll probably stab me to death. He's about to rebel." Such a rebellion was equivalent to suicide. With Ning Jiuma's personality, you would think that she was cheating on him. He would definitely stab her to death and perish together with her. The system said, "No, you're stronger than him. Why are you running?" Wei Wei Bai stopped in her tracks. That was right. He was so weak. What was she afraid of? Chapter 16:27. But just as she hesitated, a heavy body pounced on her from behind, like a hungry tiger pouncing on its prey. Wei Wei Bai reached out to push Ning Jiuma away, but before she could touch him, his hand had already grabbed her belt, and the two of them rolled into a ball. They fell into a bush by the side of the corridor. The bush was very deep, and the two of them groaned at the same time. Wei Wei Bai's waist was hit, and she was in so much pain that she couldn't get up. Even if she had the strength, she couldn't use it. Ning Jiuma's expression was sinister as he grabbed her belt and tied her hands tightly. Wei Wei Bai exerted force, and the belt split open again. Ning Jiuma's eyes were bloodshot. He suddenly pulled the sachet at his waist and covered her mouth and nose. Wei Wei Bai was already prepared. She held her breath and didn't inhale too much. Her hands, which were tied with the belt, hit him hard in the face. Ning Jiuma fainted. His hands loosened, and he fell. Infinite strength wasn't a joke. If it wasn't for Wei Wei Bai, she would still remember that this guy was her target. If she didn't show mercy, she would probably beat him into a retard again. Wei Wei Bai endured the pain and tried to get up from the ground. But Ning Jiuma looked up with blood at the corner of his mouth. He looked at her gloomily and suddenly laughed softly. "Mother!" Wei Wei Bai pursed her lips and looked at him. Sadness appeared in her eyes, and she was afraid that he would see through it. She suddenly lowered her head. "Let's not meet in the future, Your Highness." Ning Jiuma's smile didn't change, but his laughter was a little sad. "Don't meet? Mother? You're really something. You've bewitched that old bastard so much that he even promised you the position of empress. Did you give him your body?" Wei Wei Bai froze. She looked up angrily, her eyes burning with anger. "Ning Jiuma, can you not be so dirty?" "I didn't." Ning Jiuma stared at her face, and his voice trembled. "Didn't? I don't believe it. That old bastard was so cruel and cold. So selfish. Besides the benefits of cultivation, he didn't care about anything else. She didn't even care about her child anymore. If she didn't do anything, how could that old bastard dote on her so much?" Ning Jiuma held her face in his hands and touched her shoulders, waist, and thighs. His cold face was filled with rage and impatience. "Where did that old bastard touch you? Here or here?" Wei Wei Bai wanted to struggle, but Ning Jiuma ignored her and hugged her tightly. "Hit me then. You're stronger than me anyway. Just beat me to death." In the end, under the fierce tone, there was actually pain and grievance. Wei Wei Bai didn't struggle, but said helplessly, "Ning Jiuma, are you an idiot? If you send me away and go rebel, what's the difference between that and suicide?" Ning Jiuma's body stiffened. His fingers trembled as he placed them on her back. So you sacrificed yourself to become my mother? Wei Wei Bai didn't answer the question. Instead, she said softly, I will protect you. These words were usually sweet and comforting to hear. At this moment, the air was filled with a heart-wrenching smell of blood. When Ning Jiuma heard this, he really hated it. He hated it to the bone. He said in a low voice, Do you need to make your own decisions? Wei Wei Bai looked at him helplessly. She didn't seem to understand his words. But Ning Jiuma's eyes were already red. He said word by word, Who told you to make your own decisions? If you want to protect me, then use yourself to exchange for it. I can fight for the throne myself. I can kill the emperor myself. You're the only one who doesn't need to exchange for it. Why did you make your own decisions and erase all my efforts? Chapter 16:28. How could he, after giving up so much for her, when he just wanted to send her away? She walked back by herself, and then marry that old bastard. This was a slap to his face and a stab to his heart. Wei Wei Bai stared at him blankly. She forced a smile, her eyelashes fluttering slightly as tears fell. She tore open the belt in her hands inch by inch. Then, she grabbed his sleeve and took out the dagger from his sleeve. Her movements were so fast that Ning Jiuma couldn't stop her. Wei Wei Bai put the dagger to her neck, her eyes cold. I made the decision on my own. If you want to commit suicide, you have to ask me if I agree. You must have ambushed someone today. Quickly retreat. Ning Jiuma really did have someone ambushing him. He just wanted to kill the old emperor. But after killing him, his path as the emperor would be completely cut off. Ning Jiuma had a splitting headache. He gritted his teeth and said, Put it down. Wei Wei Bai didn't give in at all. I want you to go back and be the crown prince. Only when he was the crown prince would he have more power to make arrangements. Even if he wanted to rebel, he shouldn't be so rash. Ning Jiuma laughed heartbreakingly. The crown prince who calls you imperial mother. Wei Wei Bai looked at him coldly and finally said calmly, Either I die here today, or you retreat and wait for another day to plot. Ning Jiuma's head hurt more and more. It hurt so much that his heart was about to split open. He suddenly hugged his head with both hands, his mind in a mess. The suppressant finally couldn't take it anymore, and he became confused. Wei, he muttered. He opened his eyes in a daze and saw Wei Wei Bai holding a dagger to his neck. He blinked his eyes in confusion, and then he panicked. Oh wait, what's wrong? He immediately rushed over and snatched the dagger in her hand. He held the dagger in her hand in fear. After snatching it with great difficulty, he immediately threw it far away. Wei Wei Bai sat in the same place, watching the little fool anxiously hug her. Oh wait, knives are not fun. They're not fun at all. He was so flustered that he didn't know what to do. Did he do something wrong and make Ah Wei angry? Wei Wei Bai sighed faintly. Your Highness, do you listen to me? Ning Jiuma immediately nodded frantically. I'll be obedient, Ah Wei. Wei Wei Bai forced a smile and took out the small bottle. This is very important. Take it and don't throw it away. Ning Jiuma gripped the bottle tightly. Okay. I won't throw it away. Wei Wei Bai's eyes reddened as she gently reached out to tidy up his clothes. Leave this place with Zheng Xiao later. He'll bring you back and take all the pills in the bottle. Ning Jiuma looked at her in confusion. Where is Ah Wei? Isn't Wei coming back with me? Wei Wei Bai smiled even more gently. Of course I'm going back with His Highness. You go first, I'll come later. Ning Jiuma was a little hesitant and uneasy. Really? Wei Wei Bai said. His Highness won't listen to me? Ning Jiuma immediately shook his head. I'll listen. Don't be angry. Wei Wei Bai held his hand tightly. Then let's go. Ning Jiuma held the bottle and looked at her reluctantly. Zheng Xiao was already hiding at the side. He immediately walked out and held Ning Jiuma's hand respectfully as they walked forward. Wei Wei Bai stood in the grass, her dress fluttering as she looked at him calmly. Ning Jiuma turned back to look at her many times. He was like a lost child, looking at her anxiously. The system said, It feels like an old mother sending her child to kindergarten. Wei Wei Bai asked, Why isn't the favorability increasing? The download address is at https://www.sashu.com. Chapter 1629. System. The host's heart is as cold as iron. You're actually thinking about favorability at this time. Are you the devil? Zheng Xiao sent Ning Jima back. She watched him eat the bottle of medicine with her own eyes. After he finished eating, he was sweating all over and endured the pain for a while. He suddenly said coldly, Zheng Xiao. Zheng Xiao immediately knelt down and kowtowed to the ground. Ning Jima leaned against the door with sweat all over his head. His face was pale. Withdraw, everyone. Zheng Xiao immediately said, Yes, Your Highness. Ning Jima said, Then return to her side and protect her. Zheng Xiao immediately nodded. Yes, Your Highness. Ning Jima asked, Did that old bastard bully her? Zheng Xiao immediately said, No, Your Highness. She didn't let the emperor get close to her every time. She even used a white line to separate them. The emperor didn't even touch her. Ning Jima couldn't believe it and couldn't help but smile. Zheng Xiao said. She said that the emperor is not allowed to touch her until she becomes the empress. Ning Jima covered his head with his hands. His handsome face had a hint of innocence, and his smile was a little wanton. That old bastard also has this day. His Awei was still his. After Zheng Xiao left, Ning Jima's smile slowly disappeared. He hung his head weakly. There was a golden bell in his hand. It was from her belt. Did you go to that old bastard just to get me the antidote? Ning Jima's eyes were bitter and his heart ached. How could she be so protective of him? Wait for me. If you want the empress position, I can only give it to you. He gently placed a kiss on the golden bell. Ding! The male lead's favorability is at 90. When Wei Wei Bai heard the favorability, she finally pulled the blanket over and went to sleep in relief. The antidote was given to Ning Jioma. His favorability overlapped with that of Fool Ning. Ning Jioma became more and more clear-headed. Although Wei Wei Bai still liked Fool Ning, the palace was already involved in fighting. If Ning Jioma was still a fool, sooner or later, he would die for no reason. If it was Ning Tsongming, she would be at ease letting him wander around. As long as Ning Tsongming did not rebel in advance, it would be very difficult for anyone to overthrow him. Tongzi, help me keep watch. Remember to tell me when you see the old emperor. Although the old emperor's mind was not clear now, but who could guarantee that there wouldn't be a night attack? The system really wanted to say that after experiencing the baptism of its Plato's smile, the old emperor's mind would definitely be clean. However, this would expose the fact that it had a secret stash of money, so it still silently held on to this secret in its secret stash of snacks. For the next few days, Wei Wei Bai ate and drank well. It was because of that bottle of antidote. He was no longer in danger of becoming stupid. The system opened its heaven's eye and saw that the speed of Ning Jima's rebellion was increasing. It glanced at the old emperor, who was arguing with the empress. The former crown prince had gone mad again. Not only had he gone mad, he had even died. It was said that he was strangled to death in bed by a woman. It was a worthy death. The empress's family had already begun to decline. The old emperor didn't cultivate immortality and only focused on fighting the empress. He wanted the empress to be finished, so that the position of empress could be vacated for the white moonlight of his previous life. The empress thought that her enemy was Ning Jioma. In the end, the person she fought was the old scumbag emperor. The empress was miserable. The old emperor came to see Wei Wei Bai every day. He sat at the door, and after a few glances, he was chased away by Wei Wei Bai. The old emperor was happy like this, and like an old mangy dog, he would come and wait at a fixed time. Chapter 1630. Wei Wei Bai said, There's no food here, eat elsewhere. Although she didn't see Ning Jiuma, Zheng Xiao would deliberately talk about how His Highness was doing in front of her from time to time. Or from time to time, she would give her some small things. They were all exquisite jewelry and precious flowers that had been taken good care of. They were all carefully prepared by Ning Jiuma. The old emperor also gave them, but Wei Wei Bai didn't accept any of them. Anyway, she knew how scary the rewards were. The old emperor was hard-working and didn't ask for anything in return. This kind of affectionate and warm man would be the second male lead if he was more handsome. If he was ugly and old, he would be a wretched pervert. Ah, this world that looked at appearance. The system had lost all hope in Hong Xian. It was now relying on snacks and watching the drama series of the royal palace to pass the time. The host was lazy. She was too lazy to increase the favorability and was too lazy to mention the side mission. Eating and sleeping, sleeping and eating. She had gained 3 kilograms. If she wanted to lie to the male lead in the future, she wouldn't have the face to pretend to be haggard with this weight. Wei Wei by 8 crispy fried meatballs and read novels to pass the time. You don't understand. The palace is in a mess now. I don't need to do anything other than sending messages to Ning Jiuma. She was now the little princess in the evil dragon castle. Ning Jiuma was the dragon slayer. The little princess didn't need to work. She just needed to wait for the dragon slayer to do it. If I do too much work, I don't know if my character will collapse, but Fool Ning's favorability will definitely collapse first. She was now in the old emperor's house. With Zheng Qiao around, she knew that the old emperor didn't get close to her. So Ning Jiuma could still keep calm, and his favorability was very stable. But if she did too much work, then Ning Jiuma would definitely suspect that she was hooking up with the old emperor. Did the old emperor touch something? Otherwise, how could she help him so much? For suspicious people, it was best for her not to do anything. As for the side mission, she didn't have to worry about it, because the empress and her family were locked up and waiting to be executed. After fighting for a lifetime, in the end, the old emperor was the one who killed her. The empress was probably so angry that she was about to die. Wei Wei by leisurely ate the fried meatballs, lamenting that the days were really boring. Since no one was stirring up trouble, it was time for her to loosen up. Unknowingly, a month had passed. The old emperor hesitantly gave her a small bottle of antidote. He looked at the old emperor's resentful eyes. Wei Wei by drew the white line outside the door again. Stay away from me. How can we fall in love when we are of different ages? The old emperor stood at the door and poked his head out to say, Wei Wei, I want to make you a concubine, and then the empress. Wei Wei by, sure. The old emperor was sad. He wiped his tears and walked back. He must have delayed for too long, so Wei Wei by was unhappy. It had been so long, but she was still not the empress. It was all his fault. Therefore, the old emperor planned to continue fighting against those in the imperial court who opposed his choice of empress. What a mortal cultivation and longevity. None of them were as important as his beloved. Wei Wei by waved her hand disdainfully. Every time the old emperor appeared, he would bring pink petals everywhere. The background of this young girl and the old emperor's face were simply unbearable. Zheng Yi stood outside the door and gently called, Miss, the imperial edict for conferring concubine is here. Come and receive it. Wei Wei by put down the sentimental novel and heard the system say, the male lead is here to announce the edict. Chapter 1631. She touched her face. It was too oily and smooth. How could she act like she was haggard? Wei Wei by rubbed her face, trying to make herself look thinner. The system added, stop rubbing. The more you rub, the fatter you look. Wei Wei by froze. Then, she rubbed the corners of her eyes. Her face was chubby, but her eyes were often filled with tears. Ning Jiuma would definitely think that she was pitiful if he saw her like this. Ning Jiuma waited outside the door, standing beside a cluster of orchids. His face was colder and thinner. His body was slender and straight, as cold as a sharp blade. He held the imperial edict in his hand. Of course, he knew what the old emperor was thinking. The old emperor wanted him to see that Wei Wei by was now his concubine. He didn't want him to have any delusions, because the old emperor didn't cultivate immortality and didn't want to live forever. He just fought with others. This made the Taoist priest's poison completely useless. Ning Jiuma had no choice but to speed up his pace. Ning Jiuma knew the man's mentality too well. The old emperor wouldn't touch Wei Wei by now. But once Wei Wei by became the empress, how could the old emperor let her go? The more you loved a woman, the more you respected her. How crazy would it be in the end? Ning Jiuma pinched the imperial edict so hard that he wanted to crush it. Suddenly, there was the sound of footsteps behind him. Ning Jiuma immediately turned around, a trace of excitement on his face. It had been a month, but they hadn't seen each other. He saw Wei Wei Bai walk out of the door. She wasn't wearing the concubine's clothes, and her hair was tied up simply with a begonia flower. She was a little surprised to see him. "Your Highness," Wei Wei Bai kept this title at the corner of her mouth, with a hint of tenderness. Ning Jima looked at her from afar, focusing on her. His cold eyes gradually warmed up. The two of them didn't move for a while. Wei Wei Bai stepped out of the door first and walked in front of him. Ning Jiuma suddenly said in a low voice, "I've lost weight." Wei Wei Bai, Ning Jiuma's tone became pitiful. "Without you, I can't eat or sleep. There's so many things to do. The Emperor, that old bastard, wants to tire me out." "What's with this complaining tone?" Wei Wei Bai was about to comfort her when Ning Jiuma snorted, "Congratulations, Gue Fein Yang Yang. This is your imperial edict." With that, he tossed the imperial edict to Zheng Xiao. "It's nothing valuable. I burned it after reading it." Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but say in a low voice, "Your Highness, bear with it for a while. It will get better in the future." "Ning Jiuma, I haven't seen you for almost a month. Do you miss me?" It was so straightforward. "Is idiot Ning back?" Wei Wei Bai touched her face that had gained a few kilograms. She really didn't have the face to say that she missed him so much that she couldn't eat or drink. Ning Jiuma was not blind. Wei Wei Bai went against her conscience and was about to say that she would gain 3 pounds if she missed him. But he suddenly lowered his head and kissed her cheek. Then he whispered in her ear, "I'll wait. Wait for me." From a moment she entered the palace. She was the one who had been protecting him. Now, it was his turn to protect her. Ning Jiuma straightened his body and looked at her deeply. Then he took a few steps back and suddenly turned to leave. He missed her. So even if he knew that it was a consort ceremony, he still came. After seeing her, his anxious and crazy heart calmed down. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 93. After Ning Jiuma went back, Zheng Xiao also went to the door. Zheng Xiao held a set of clothes. "Your Highness, this was made by the girl herself." Chapter 1632. When Ning Jiuma saw this, he knew that she had started making clothes for him when he was a fool. The clothes were dark blue, and the needlework was much worse than the ones used by the royal family. But Ning Jiuma hugged the clothes and was in a very good mood. He couldn't help but smile, but his chest suddenly hurt. Ning Jiuma put down the clothes and spat out a mouthful of blood. Although the antidote could cure part of the poison was too deep. If he was too emotional, the poison would still act up. Ning Jiuma's face was pale. He reached out to support his forehead and endured the pain. "Give me the medicine to suppress it." He didn't have the antidote, but he still had the medicine to suppress it. Zheng Xiao frowned and looked worried. "Your Highness, you've taken part of the antidote. If you take the medicine to suppress it, it will be too destructive to your body." Ning Jiuma sneered. "I have too many things to do now. I can't take a wrong step. Without Wei, he would become an idiot, a complete idiot." Zheng Xiao saw that he was so determined. A trace of hesitation flashed in his eyes. In the end, he said, "Your Highness, hold on. I'll go find her." Ning Jiuma's expression changed. He was about to ask him to come back, but the severe headache made him unable to scream. He sat on the chair and almost curled up into a ball. "Why do you ask her to come back? Ask her to ask that old man for the antidote." Zheng Xiao had always said that the old bastard respected her. He wouldn't get close to her. But that old bastard didn't even cultivate immortality. He was thinking of ways to get her the position of Empress. How could that old bastard not want to get close to her? And he didn't want her to see him like a fool. Men were competitive. If there was no external threat, Ning Jiuma might not care. Anyway, she liked his silly look the most. But if the old emperor came, the threat would explode. If he really became a fool, he wouldn't be able to snatch her back. Ning Jiuma's mind was in a mess. He hugged his head and endured. Everything in front of him blurred. He suddenly heard the sound of the door curtain. He looked over and saw a slender figure running over. He moved his lips. "Away." Wei Wei Bai rushed over and reached out to touch his face. It was covered in cold sweat. His forehead was boiling hot. Ning Jiuma looked at her in a daze and suddenly said, "Ah Wei, I miss you so much." He was half asleep and half awake, so he couldn't feel anything. All he could see was her anxious face. Wei Wei Bai lifted him up and put him on the bed. Ning Jiuma's face was abnormally red. He had a fever. Wei Wei Bai's expression turned cold. "Call the imperial physician." Zheng Xiao immediately ran over. Wei Wei Bai wanted to get a wet handkerchief for him, but Ning Jiuma grabbed her sleeve tightly. "Wei, where are you going? Don't you want me anymore?" he said pitifully. His beautiful and moist eyes were completely devoid of the fierceness and darkness he had when he was awake. "Wei Wei Bai, you're being silly again." Seeing that she wasn't replying, Ning Jiuma hurriedly hugged her like a child, trapping her with his long arms and legs. "I was dreaming. I dreamt that you left me." Wei Wei Bai felt that his body was scarily hot. She took out the antidote from the old emperor. Just as she was about to pour out the antidote, Ning Jiuma suddenly pushed her onto the bed and hugged her tightly. Even if Bai Weiwei was strong, when her hands and feet were bound, she couldn't break free for a while. Ning Jiuma was determined not to let her go. When he wasn't silly, he could still suppress it. When he was silly, all the paranoia in his mind ran out. Chapter 1633. Ning Jiuma hugged her tightly with tears in his eyes. "Oh wait, I'm stupid. I'm useless. Don't go." When he was in a daze, he seemed to know a lot of things. It was very chaotic, but his mind was very clear that Ah Wei had been snatched away. He finally knew that she had once taught him to become strong. Otherwise, she would be bullied. That was true. It was all because he was too stupid and didn't know anything. She had been snatched away, and he couldn't do anything. Ning Jiuma cried in grievance. He was like a powerless child who had to protect his most precious thing. "Oh wait, I'm useless. I'm useless." When he turned into a fool, he vented his insecurity without restraint. Wei Wei Bai paused in her action of pushing him away. In the end, she couldn't reach out and put her hand on his back, comforting this giant preschooler like an old mother. "Your Highness, I'm fine. I've always been here." Ning Jiuma didn't believe her. He shook his head so hard that his hair rubbed against her neck. It was itchy. He was like a large husky. "Don't go. I can learn anything." "Really?" Ning Jiuma looked up in a daze. His wet eyes had a hint of madness. Wei Wei Bai looked at him and felt that the antidote was still useful. The foolish Ning and the smart Ning seemed to have intertwined. The foolish Ning in the past didn't have such sharp and terrifying eyes. Zheng Xiao rushed over with the imperial doctor. "Miss, the imperial doctor is here." He shut his mouth abruptly, and the two masters rolled together on the bed. Ning Jiuma immediately looked up and stared at those people. They were all bad people who had come to snatch Ah Wei away. He immediately got up, picked up an incense burner beside him, and threw it at Zheng Xiao. "Get lost. Who dares to come in without my orders?" Zheng Xiao jumped up in fright and ran back with the imperial doctor. He thought that he was going to be killed for disturbing his master. Wei Wei Bai also thought that Ning Jiuma had woken up. But the next moment, Ning Jiuma immediately rushed over and hugged her. The two of them rolled on the bed because of the momentum. Wei Wei Bai felt that Ning Jiuma had really turned into a giant dog. This attack power was truly terrifying. Ning Jiuma's eyes were innocent and pitiful. "Ah Wei, do you think I'm learning well? They're all afraid of me." Wei Wei Bai's face was a little red from the heat of his body. She said softly, "Your Highness, you're always the best. Whatever you do, I think of the best." When Ning Jiuma heard this, he looked at her in a daze and suddenly revealed a childish smile. He was handsome to begin with, and the red mark on his face did not detract from his beauty at all. Even the spring flowers and full moon couldn't compare to his smile. Ding! The male lead's favorability is at 95. Wei Wei Bai reached out and touched his forehead. "Your Highness, you need to take medicine." Ning Jiuma held her hand nervously. He seemed to be uneasy about something, but his hand slowly loosened. "Okay, listen to Wei. If Wei told him to take it, he would take it. But he didn't know why, but he had a clear understanding in his heart. The more medicine he took, the more likely he would never see Wei again." Wei Wei Bai took out the antidote and fed him one by one like candy. Ning Jiuma looked at her without moving his eyes, but he didn't resist at all and took the medicine. Wei Wei Bai saw that he had taken a medicine and comforted him to sleep. He held her hand tightly and leaned against the pillow, looking at her in satisfaction. Slack. Chapter 1634. He looked really silly, but his eyes were as bright as the Milky Way. Wei Wei Bai sat by the bed and accompanied him. Ning Jiuma's vision turned dark. His eyelids were very heavy and he wanted to sleep. Wei Wei Bai reached out and touched his eyes, saying softly, "Sleep, Your Highness. You're too tired." He was indeed tired, but he didn't dare to sleep. He was afraid that Wei would be snatched away again. Ning Jiuma suddenly held her fingers tightly. "Wei, can you tie a kite for me?" It took time to tie a kite. She could only tie a kite here. He would sleep for a while, and she would still be by his side when he woke up. Wei Wei Bai was silent for a while before saying softly, "Okay, Your Highness, I'll tie a kite for you." Ning Jiuma smiled happily, then slowly closed his eyes and fell asleep. Wei Wei Bai felt that after taking so much antidote, idiot Ning had basically disappeared. He might be Ning Songming in the future. She looked at him silently for a while, then got up and walked out. Zheng Xiao was still waiting with the imperial doctor. Wei Wei Bai said to Zheng Xiao, "Take good care of him." Zheng Xiao nodded, thinking this girl was really good. Wei Wei Bai received a grateful look from Zheng Xiao's little fan. Then she went back. When she went back, the old emperor squatted at the door again. "Wei Wei, can I eat at the door?" Wei Wei Bai was tying a kite. She probably wouldn't see idiot Ning in the future, so she tied a kite in advance as a gift for idiot Ning. "Up to you." The old emperor didn't care at all about her perfunctory tone and immediately set a table at the door with a smile. "Wei Wei, eat some too." Wei Wei Bai looked down at the kite. "I've eaten." The old emperor hurriedly ate a few mouthfuls of rice. "Then I'll eat faster." The sky was filled with petals, and the background was childish. A lonely old man, like a reincarnated hungry ghost, was eating. Eru reflects the moon. A lonely old man was chased to the door by his heartless children to eat leftovers. It was indescribably sad. The system couldn't bear to watch any longer. Too pitiful. The most tragic side mission target in history. Although the old emperor was a little old, his foundation was still very good. Otherwise, how could she have given birth to such a good-looking child like Ning Jiuma? It was just that she had a few more wrinkles on her face, and she always dressed up cleanly. In modern times, he would be a very charming uncle. Why did the host despise him so much? Wei Wei Bai sighed. "I had no choice." Every time she saw the old emperor, there were clusters of pink roses in the background. What's more, it was virtual petals that were scattered every day. She didn't know why, but she had the urge to beat the old emperor to death. Now that she was so strong, a single impulse would cause blood to splatter everywhere. So she told the old emperor to stay away from her. It was also to protect the side quest. Of course, the most important reason was ugly rejection. After the old emperor finished his meal, he dawdled and drank his tea at the door. He was also bitten by mosquitoes. "Away, let's find a time to make you my empress, okay?" he said carefully, afraid of being rejected. Wei Wei Bai thought for a while and decided to test the old emperor to see if his IQ had broken through the bottom line. So she said, "I've been dreaming recently. I think someone wants to harm me." The emperor's expression turned cold. "Who wants to harm you?" Wei Wei Bai, "It's just a dream, but I think the palace guards are not strict enough." The emperor immediately said, "I'll change the head of the guards immediately. Next time you open the bookshelf, you'll see it, if you like." Chapter 1635. Wei Wei Bai, "Give it to the crown prince." Emperor, "Okay, I'll listen to you." Wei Wei Bai, then she silently said to the system, "The emperor feels like he's retarded. With Ning Jiuma's ambitious appearance, if he was given the position of the leader of the imperial guards, he would immediately rebel tomorrow." The emperor saw that she was silent and said uneasily, "So, are you going to be the empress?" Bai Weiwei looked deeply at him with concern for the mentally handicapped and respect for the elderly and virtuous. "Yes, Your Majesty." The emperor was immediately satisfied. His time was over, so he reluctantly said, "Then I'll go back." Wei Wei Bai, wave your hand. Have a good trip. This plan was simply a fool strategy. After the idiot Ning came an old idiot. Wei Wei Bai felt that this was a really comfortable plane. Any protagonist would feel that tomorrow was really beautiful in a world where their IQ dropped. When Ning Jumal woke up, he stared at the beaded curtain in front of him in a daze. That familiar figure would come back again. Zheng Kuang carefully came back. Your Highness, I heard the news. At the end of the month, the Emperor will confer the title of Empress to you. There are so many dynasties in this world. She had never heard of such a ridiculous thing. In just 1 or 2 months, a palace maid was going to be promoted to Empress. Just the sound of it was enough to shock people. But Ning Jumal wasn't surprised. He just coldly played with the antidote bottle. His body knew that the poison had been diluted by more than half. Basically, he would take a few more antidotes. The poison in his body would be cured. Ning Jumal suddenly looked up and said to Zheng Kuang, "Open that dog hole and put our people into the palace in batches." Zheng Kuang trembled. Your Highness. Ning Jumal's eyes were as dark as ink, and his voice was as cold as spring. We're not waiting anymore. Always kite is almost done. Zheng Kuang hesitated a few times before finally saying, Yes, Your Highness. The spring flowers were flourishing and the rainy season gradually passed. When Wei Wei Bai was idling away her days, she also felt that the days flew by quickly. In the past, the system would try to persuade him, but it was hurt by the red line that couldn't be cut. It was now officially renamed Ling Ling number 2, Salted Fish number 4. The two leaders were too lazy to incur the wrath of men and gods. The dialogue was also the same as before. Host, the male lead is here, quick guide. Tongzi, I will immediately enter a life or death state to attack. Until now. Tongzi, I have to finish reading the novel. Host, I'm almost done with my snacks. I really want to lie down and read novels, eat pastries, and even have someone bring me the toilet. I really want to eat snacks and watch porn. My HP will automatically drop as I lie down. The host and the system were two big salted fish, but they suddenly found each other very pleasing to the eye. What a beautiful system of sharing weal and woe, and sharing the same soul. As for Ning Jiuma and the old emperor's affairs, in any case, it was a fight to the death. Wei Wei Bai and the system were too lazy to pay attention to it. It was finally the end of the month, and the coronation ceremony was about to be held. White Salted Fish finally perked up, because the side mission was about to be completed. There were only a few main missions left, and it would be full after a while. This plane was finally going to be over. A group of palace maids came in with clothes, and Wei Wei Bai chatted with the system while changing. I think the little fool is going to rebel. The system said a lot of people were let in, but the old emperor seems to be on guard. The old emperor was only silly towards Wei Wei Bai. Download the at https://m Sashu. Com. Chapter 1636. But when the pink petals weren't there, the old emperor was very clear-headed. Wei Wei Bai said, The little fool has also made arrangements for the imperial guards. The old emperor had given the imperial guards to Ning Jiuma. If Ning Jiuma didn't do anything, it would be a waste of his intelligence and ambition. The system glanced at it. Many of the male lead's men are mixed in, but half of them are still the old emperor's men. After all, how could they subdue the imperial guards in a month's time? But half of them were already very powerful. Wei Wei Bai patted her face. Okay, I should get to work. She was already fat. If she continued to be lazy, she would turn from a slender little fish into a fat whale. Let's go back after this, Wei Wei Bai said. The system flipped through the information and nodded. Okay, let me prepare. The red line was a hidden danger. It was too long, so the system tied a knot for the red line. This way, when the red line crossed the soul channel, it wouldn't be so restrained. The system packed up the red line and was about to tie a knot. Suddenly, it looked at the time of the side mission. Strange, it had never happened before. The side mission would appear for a lifetime. Usually, the longest side mission had to be related to the main mission. Why was there such a strange time rule? The system thought deeply and then remembered that it hadn't finished eating its raisins. When it watched the show later, it would have snacks again. Wei Wei put on her clothes. The palace maids and eunuchs lined up in 2 rows and helped her step by step to the main hall. When she walked up the stairs, she heard the system say, "The male lead has become a wife-gazing stone and is looking at you in a daze." During this time, the old emperor and Ning Jioma had been fighting to the death. Ning Jioma didn't have a chance to see her. He could only ask Zhang Qiao to bring her flowers. The begonia blooming period hadn't passed yet, so he brought her begonia flowers. Today, she also put a begonia flower in her hair. It was a gorgeous flower, making her face look as beautiful as the sunset. She looked up and saw Ning Jioma standing at the door. He was wearing the crown prince's black robes and looked handsome. His face was still thin and sharp, but he had a delicate air. He smiled at her. Wei Wei couldn't help but smile. It was as if this was their wedding. Ding! The male lead's favorability is at 97. The system was eating a raisin. The side mission was about to be completed. The host's mind was floating, teasing the male lead so casually. Her favorability towards him was climbing rapidly. The old emperor was anxious to see his empress and immediately rushed out of the door. She saw Wei Wei and Ning Jioma looking at each other. The old emperor seemed to have heard a desolate grassland tune. A green grassland replaced his pink petals. He looked desolately at Wei Wei. She was his lover from his previous life, the one he loved in this life. It was all his fault for being born early. He was born in a different era from her. She let this unfilial son see her one step earlier. Once the ceremony was over, he immediately resumed his old path of immortality. He asked the heavenly master to get him some medicine that could make him young. Only then would he be a good match for the empress. As for this unfilial son, he would deal with him in the future. After the emperor made up his mind, he immediately beamed with joy. He walked down the stairs, followed by a group of eunuchs. Wei Wei, let's go in. The ceremony was about to begin. Wei Wei's eyes turned cold again. She went up the stairs by herself, ignoring the old emperor's hand. The favorability had reached a critical point, but now they were holding hands. Chapter 1637. Didn't it hurt the favorability? She could only feel sorry for the old emperor. Wei glanced at the old emperor and saw the wrinkles on his face. The regret in her heart suddenly disappeared. This world that only looked at one's appearance was truly evil. Ning Jioma stood in place, his gaze focused on her skirt as it slowly disappeared from his sight. His fingers bent as if he was trying to grab something, but in the end, he did not manage to grab anything. In the main hall, hundreds of officials were gathered. It was a dazzling sight. The emperor stood together with Wei and just as they were about to announce an edict to officially confer the title, suddenly, a chi sound was heard. It was the sound of fireworks. The old emperor did make a lot of fireworks. They were supposed to be used during the banquet at night. Why was it so early? Wei said, "Tongzi, Ning Jioma can't be rebelling this early, right? The best time should be at night. Now is not the right time to rebel." Moreover, her side mission had not been completed yet. The system said, "Rebel, they are all here." As soon as the system finished speaking, a wave of shouts came from all directions. Weapons clashed, and the screams of the palace servants rang out. All the fireworks flew up into the sky and exploded into blooming flowers. The old emperor's expression changed. That unfilial son. He immediately reached out to hold Wei Bai's hand, intending to bring her to a safe place. But in the next moment, a sharp arrow pierced through the air and shot towards the old emperor's back. The old emperor felt the danger, and immediately he fell down. The arrow broke the edict about the empress. Wei turned around and saw Ning Jioma standing at the door in a black suit. He had a bow in his hand, and an arrow was knocked. His eyes were as dark as ink, cold as ice, and his thin body was as straight as a knife. When he saw Wei turn around, he could not help but smile. That cold look also made him look silly. Wei also smiled. She really wanted to strangle this bastard Ning Jioma. wait a little longer, and her side mission would be completed. She just wanted to kneel down and scream. Couldn't Ning Jioma wait for a little while longer? Of course, Ning Jioma also knew that night was the best time to rebel. However, he would not allow Wei Wei Bai and the emperor's coronation ceremony to succeed. He should be the one to do it. What was that old turtle? When he saw that the old emperor was about to get up, he immediately drew his bow and shot an arrow, wanted to turn the old emperor into a sieve. Although the old emperor's body was weak, he was very fast when it came to escaping. He rolled and dodged the attack. He roared, men, kill this unfilial son." Although the pink flower petals retardation drug had caused his mind to be muddled. However, when it came to life and death, he immediately became clear-headed. Ning Jioma gritted his teeth and said, "Kill them." The surrounding soldiers roared, "Kill." The old emperor's men immediately guarded the entrance and started fighting with Ning Jioma's men. The imperial guards were evenly matched, and the civil and military officials also joined in the battle. The various forces were in chaos. On the other hand, Wei Wei Bai stood at the top and had nothing to do. She stared at the imperial edict and sighed to the system. "I've worked hard for more than a month, but I didn't get anything." System, damn, you've been eating and waiting for death for more than a month. However, it's a pity that you didn't complete the side mission. The system comforted her. "It's okay. The male lead killed the emperor today and took the throne himself. Don't you still have time to complete the mission?" To make it easier for you to read it next time, you can click the save button at the bottom to record your reading record. Chapter 1638. Wei Wei Bai thought about it and agreed. Then she immediately looked at Ning Jioma with sparkling eyes. She couldn't wait to wave the flag and shout, "Come on, dear, I'll wait for you to make me your empress." Ning Jioma saw her anticipation and killed the enemy even more bravely. His Awei was waiting for him to save her. Ning Jioma was just short of wagging his tail and telling his Awei to wait for him to solve all the problems and to hold hands with her forever. The old emperor stood up awkwardly and laughed coldly. Then he waved his hand, and a portion of the soldiers on Ning Jioma's side suddenly betrayed him and assassinated many of Ning Jioma's men. Ning Jioma's expression changed. He pulled out his sword and cut off the neck of one of the soldiers who betrayed him. Blood splattered all over his face and brought out a murderous aura. He killed one person with each step, and every step was covered in blood. Ning Jioma stared at Wei Wei Bai and moved forward inch by inch. Every inch of the path was made of corpses. If it was in the past, he would be timid, cowardly, and afraid. That silly Ning Jioma was actually his true nature. But after meeting Ao Wei, he knew that he had someone to protect. He couldn't retreat and endure anymore. All the plans that he had in the past were overturned by him. Because he couldn't wait, his Ao Wei was waiting for him with a kite. The old emperor also picked up a sword and slowly walked to Wei Wei Bai's side. "Wei Wei, for you, I endured this unfilial son's disobedience. Now that I've killed him, you can't blame me." The old emperor deliberately condoned Ning Jioma's rebellion because he felt that his white moonlight, red rose, liked that unfilial son. He couldn't let Wei Wei Bai think that he killed Ning Jioma on purpose. Otherwise, what if his white moonlight blamed him? That was why he set up a trap for Ning Jioma to rebel and then kill him. Who could this unfilial son have? He was just the imperial guards that he gave him. After he gave the imperial guard away, did this unfilial son think that he could succeed in forcing the emperor to abdicate? Wrong. Most of the imperial guards were his people. So today, Ning Jioma had to die. Bai Yueguang couldn't blame him for dying like this. The old emperor, whose IQ had been destroyed by Plato's smile and the love of the emperor, wavered between being stupid and not being stupid. The old emperor raised his sword. "Kill all the traitors." His shout attracted the attention of the soldiers who were lying in ambush. Layers upon layers of silver-armored soldiers suddenly rushed in and surrounded Ning Jioma's army. Ning Jioma stood in the pool of blood with an indifferent expression. Blood dripped from his forehead. His black formal attire was already drenched in blood. Layers upon layers of people were killing each other. Wei Wei Bai felt that this scene was indescribably tragic. She had simply become a demoness who could cause the downfall of a country. Ning Jioma was forced to retreat by the silver-armored soldiers. The soldiers protecting Ning Jioma formed a circle. In the middle of the circle, Ning Jioma coldly looked up at the sky. He suddenly stretched out his long arm and opened a bow. A burning fireball was placed on the arrowhead. He shot into the sky. The exploding fireballs were extremely dazzling, even more dazzling than fireworks. A large amount of golden powder bloomed. He stood in the golden light and turned to look at Wei Wei Bai with a face full of blood. She stood there, wearing a red dress. The begonia flower in her hair was so beautiful. Ning Jiuma couldn't help but laugh. Her innocent and silly appearance was like seeing the best scenery. He suddenly felt that even if the rebellion didn't succeed, he would be satisfied if he died on the way to her. Ding! The male lead's favorability is at 98. Wei Wei Bai slowly closed her eyes. She clenched her fists and turned to look at the old emperor. Chapter 1639. But the old emperor walked far away, as if he was afraid that she would plead for mercy. After the golden fireball exploded, Zheng Qiao suddenly appeared. He led a group of black-armored soldiers and hurried over. The old emperor's expression finally changed. He shouted, "Kill that unfilial son." He didn't expect this unfilial son to have an ambush. But the soldiers in the palace were all under his control. Where did these soldiers in black armor come from? Before the old emperor could figure it out, Ning Jiuma had already broken through the heavy blockade. His body was stained with blood, and all kinds of wounds appeared on his body. He held his sword and finally walked up the stairs. He was cut in the back, and his walking posture was a bit shaky. The system saw the male lead in such a miserable state and couldn't help but say, "Why don't we help him and make the old emperor even more retarded?" Wei Wei Bai said softly, "Let him grow." She had to leave sooner or later. She couldn't really protect Ning Jiuma for a lifetime, so he had to survive this mountain of corpses and sea of blood. Otherwise, after she left, this little fool wouldn't be able to survive in the palace. Wei Wei Bai stood at the top and said to the system, "If he wants to be the emperor in the future, he must have this experience." It was rare that she would think for Ning Jiuma. Maybe it was because she had been a mother for so long that she couldn't help but worry for him. The system couldn't help but look at the shield. It seemed like it was going to crack again. The system used the OK tape to paste it again. The soldiers in black armor began to kill the soldiers in silver armor. Ning Jiuma couldn't help but laugh. His lips were covered in blood, and he looked very scary. Behind him, there were shouts, and the sound of blood splashing was very complicated. But he didn't care and kept walking up the stairs, just to reach her side. He had planned for so many years and took it all out today. If he didn't succeed, then he would die by her side. Wei Wei Bai stretched out her hand. She lowered her head and shouted, "Your Highness." Ning Jiuma also stretched out his trembling hand. He was about to grab her, but he seemed to see the old emperor holding a sword and running quickly towards him. Ning Jiuma's expression turned cold as he blocked the old emperor's sword with his long sword. The old emperor was old after all. He couldn't win against Ning Jiuma, who was seriously injured. However, Ning Jiuma's vision suddenly turned black as if the poison was acting up. The remaining bit of poison made him almost unable to support his body. The old emperor's eyes turned cold, and the sword in his hand immediately went into his heart. Ning Jiuma's hand trembled, and he didn't even raise his sword. He was about to be killed. The sound of a long sword piercing through flesh suddenly rang in Ning Jiuma's ears. Was it over? Ning Jiuma thought he was going to die. But in the next moment, a ball of red mist fell into his arms. Ning Jiuma felt his legs go soft as he knelt on the ground. He looked up blankly, only to see Wei Wei Bai standing there, but a sword had pierced through her chest. She seemed to be in a daze. Blood splashed from her chest and dripped onto Ning Jiuma's face and eyes. At this moment, Ning Jiuma's eyes were red. The entire world was red, so red that it was tragic and hopeless. His fingers trembled as he hurriedly hugged her skirt. He whispered, "Ah Wei." Wei Wei Bai just smiled. She bent down as if she wanted to reach out and touch his face. Ning Jioma stared at her blankly, not knowing how to react. Wei Wei Bai lowered her eyes. Her white neck was like a fragile flower stem, and the begonia in her hair had fallen. She said softly, "Your Highness, your face is dirty. I'll get some water to wash it for you." Slash. Chapter 1640. Ning Jioma quickly grabbed her hand, panicking like a pitiful child. He said, "Okay, I'll Wei, okay." But in the next moment, Wei Wei Bai collapsed. Her eyes slowly closed as blood flowed all over the ground. Ning Jioma was stunned. He suddenly screamed at the top of his lungs. He held the sword and stabbed it into the old emperor's body like a madman. On the verge of death, the old emperor suddenly woke up and the effect of the love of the emperor disappeared. Where was he? What was he doing? Why was he here? Before he could figure out, the sword had already pierced through his heart, and he died. After killing the emperor, Ning Jioma crawled to Wei Wei Bai's side. He hugged her, his eyes bloodshot. "Oh, Wei, you're fine. You're fine." He reached out and pulled the sword out. Blood splattered all over the ground. He immediately wrapped her clothes tightly around her chest. The system expressed that it was very tragic. Then it activated the life guarantee. It seemed that it couldn't avoid the eunuch 100 times. What a sad story. Even the life guarantee couldn't heal such a heavy wound. Even the main mission was only 98. It was all its fault for being lazy. It was retribution. That was what it thought. The favorability notification sounded. Ding, the male lead's favorability is 100. Congratulations to the host for completing the main mission. The host's body has been severely damaged. You need to leave this world immediately. Countdown to leave. If you fail to leave, you'll have to solve this side mission for a lifetime. The host needs to stay in this world for a lifetime to be the Empress. Wait, wasn't she supposed to be the Empress and have a lifetime to solve? Why was she supposed to be the Empress for a lifetime? This was a completely different mission from being the Empress for a day and being able to leave. The host is heavily injured. The main system will send a free high-level life guarantee. Please accept. The system immediately accepted. High-level life guarantee. As long as you had a breath, you would be alive and kicking. Even zombies could turn you into a normal person. Successfully accepted. The host is very cute. Please be the Empress for a lifetime. The system watched as Ning Jioma hugged Wei Wei Bai and cried in agony. With the old emperor dead, the battle was Ning Jioma's. Zheng Xiao led his men to clean up all of the old emperor's soldiers. However, Ning Jioma couldn't care less about anything. He only had Wei Wei Bai to protect. What throne? What fruit of victory? He didn't care at all. The system looked at the red line, and a strange thought suddenly flashed through its mind. This lifetime side mission might have something to do with the influence of the red line. Just look at Wei Wei Bai's broken luck. If the main system didn't hack her to death, she could count herself lucky. But the continuous high luck side quests and high-level life support rewards. There were even small gifts that were randomly distributed during festivals. All of them had received huge rewards. The red string was tied to Yi Yuxuan. Yi Yuxuan was the child of destiny. Therefore, his providence could penetrate space and affect Wei Wei Bai's providence, even tampering with her mission. The purpose of all this was to force her to stay here for the rest of her life. It seemed that Yi Yuxuan was really obsessed with her whole life. The system felt a headache. How should it face Wei Wei Bai? If she knew, she would stay here for the rest of her life. She would probably become a super big salted fish, the kind that couldn't even be bothered to turn over. In the previous world, she had complained for the rest of her life. It had been too long. She was so bored that she wanted to grow hair. /mobile. Chapter 1641. She was probably even more bored in this world. There were no games to play and only a few drama books. The host would definitely nag again. What if she didn't do the side mission and left early? The system indicated that it needed to solve this terrible problem. It silently bought earplugs and stuffed them into its ears. Very good. It couldn't hear the host's complaints. It wouldn't cut it even if it died. It could only wrong the host and squat in this world for a lifetime. At most, it would download SpongeBob SquarePants for her. Those who survived the disaster in the palace clearly remembered that day. The crown prince killed his father and usurped the throne. The smell of blood floated in the air, and the blood was like a river. The floor tiles were soaked red and couldn't be washed clean. They could only dig out the tiles and rebuild them. After the old emperor died, his corpse was whipped by the crown prince. Even if he entered the imperial tomb according to the rules, it was the most remote place. Even the crown prince knew the emperor didn't need anyone to visit the tomb. Except for an old eunuch, no one dared to go. The new emperor was cruel and merciless. Those ministers who flattered him to get the position were either killed or punished. Even if the new emperor was so cold, his reputation was growing. He didn't like women and didn't have any hobby of shaking the national treasury. Other than guarding the empress, he buried himself in government affairs. The empress had been seriously injured in that cruel palace war and was in a coma. She slept from spring to the end of summer. The lotus flowers had withered, but she was still sleeping quietly. Ning Jiuma dealt with a criminal minister and walked quickly into the palace. His face was so cold that it was scary. A pair of black eyes, cold to the bone. Zheng Xiao followed behind him carefully. "Your Majesty, the Empress's wound has healed. The imperial doctor said that the Empress's condition is getting better." Ning Jiuma said coldly, "I don't want to listen to this nonsense. If she doesn't wake up, I will cut off the heads of those useless people." Who was the most miserable in the palace? Imperial Hospital. They were worried that their heads would fall off. Several imperial doctors were so worried that they were seriously ill. Ning Jiuma suddenly slowed down and looked at the golden bell tied to the bed. The bell swayed with the wind. Under the bell, Wei Wei Bai's peaceful sleeping face was pale and delicate. After sleeping for a few months, her body had become even thinner and weaker. Zheng Qiao stealthily stepped back and waved her hand. All the palace maids followed her out. The door closed quietly, giving Ning Jiuma a quiet space. No one wanted to recall the desperate look on Ning Jiuma's face when he hugged Wei Wei Bai, who was covered in blood. He was in so much pain that he wished he was dead. It was not enough to describe his appearance back then. If they hadn't found out about Wei Wei Bai, she would have had a chance to live. Maybe Ning Jiuma didn't even want to treat his own wound. He allowed himself to follow Wei Wei Bai. Zheng Yao's legs turned to jelly at the thought of that scene. When he led the army to set up a formation to kill people, he wasn't that scared. Only when he saw Ning Jiuma's desperate and crazy eyes did he feel a chill run down his spine. Later on, he tried to save her day and night. Finally, Ning Jiuma and Wei Wei Bai were saved. Ning Jiuma's wounds were getting better day by day, and his means were getting sharper and more powerful. But he was also getting colder and colder. After Zheng Yao closed the door, Ning Jiuma sat by the bed in a daze. He reached out and slowly put his hand between her weak fingers, intertwining his fingers. Ning Jiuma didn't say anything and just sat there quietly. Although she was conferred the title of Empress after he sat on the throne, they didn't hold a real wedding. Chapter 1642. Because she was still asleep, Ning Jiuma closed his eyes as if he was enduring something, but he couldn't hold it in any longer. "Away, wake up. This house is too big. Without you here, I'm scared every night," he said as he kissed her hand, tears falling from his red eyes. "I'm so tired. Some women wanted to get close to me, but I kicked them out of the palace. Everyone wants to bully me. I'm so sad." He cried and trembled. A lonely world, a pitiful one. It was so sad. Wei Wei Bai and the system floated above his head expressionlessly, watching him cry. Didn't he find the old emperor's antidote a long time ago and eat it all? Wei Wei Bai said. Ning Jiuma was no longer a fool. But every time he sat here alone, he would become a little fool and cry miserably, telling others that he was bullied. It felt like the scene of a child in kindergarten crying and complaining to their elders when they return home. The system said, to wake you up, he thought you liked Fool Ning more, so he pretended to be Fool Ning and cried to you every day, hoping that you'll wake up. Wei Wei Bai crossed her arms. We really can't go back. Once she heard that the side mission required a lifetime. Wei Wei Bai refused and generously said that she could accept the punishment. After arguing with the system for a month, the system finally couldn't take it anymore and pressed the button to go back. Even if the system had 100 earplugs, it couldn't stand the host's terrifying, hypnotic nagging. But the button failed, and the side mission was stuck at the red line. Even if it couldn't be completed, it would still stay there forever. As long as Wei Wei Bai didn't complete the mission, she could only float behind Ning Jioma like a lonely ghost. Wei Wei Bai had been floating for a few months. She still couldn't go back. She felt that her life was so dark. A lifetime of strategy time was simply a nightmare. The system looked haggard. I'll download more files for the domineering little wife. There are so many novels. Wei Wei Bai, it's not enough for me to read for a lifetime. The system flipped through it again and took out its collection of films. This is a super blockbuster of the nurse and the doctor, the male caretaker and the housewife, and the teacher and the student. Do you want to watch it? Don't you want to watch it? Bai Wei Wei sneered. Am I such a person who hasn't seen the world? I've already done it before. Why would I need your film? The system indicated that it had suffered 10,000 blows. It never did. Therefore, he didn't know or understand. He didn't want to see Wei Wei Bai's proud eyes. Wei Wei Bai watched as Ning Jioma cried so miserably. She finally said, forget it. We can't leave anyway, so we might as well complete the side mission. She wanted to be Ning Jioma's guardian spirit for the rest of her life and watch him cry every day. It was even more boring. When the system heard this, it silently hid its beeping videos. Wei Wei Bai said calmly, you said to show it to me. Don't hide it anymore. After Ning Jioma finished crying, he went to bed and hugged Wei Wei Bai to sleep. Listening to her steady heartbeat, his violent mood slowly calmed down. Oh Wei, if you're like this, I can't have fat babies with you. He complained softly, unspeakably pitiful. Wei Wei Bai sank into his body and slowly felt his body fusing with hers. When she opened her eyes, she could hear his slightly unsteady breathing beside her. He was asleep. Chapter 1643. On the dark bed, he leaned his face against her shoulder. There were still traces of tears at the corners of his eyes. Wei Wei Bai looked at him for a while before gently wiping the corners of his eyes. Her actions were calm, but very gentle. When Ning Jioma woke up the next day, he saw that Wei Wei Bai was still sleeping soundly. He stared at her bitterly for a long time before hugging her. He washed her face, combed her hair, and massaged her limbs. In the past, Wei Wei Bai took care of him. Now, he was the one taking care of her. After Ning Jioma massaged her, he put on beautiful clothes for her. It was the blooming season of the jade hairpin flower. Ning Jioma inserted a beautiful jade hairpin flower into her hair bun. You've been sleeping for too long. You've lost all color. He muttered softly. He reached out and touched some rouge, applying some on her face. The pink color added a hint of vitality to her pale, jade-like face. Delicate, weak, and unbearable to hold. He lowered his head and kissed her lips, not daring to have any other thoughts. Her body was so weak. If he went overboard, he was afraid that Wei Wei Bai would really not wake up. Ning Jioma slowly crouched beside her and nagged a lot. When he was satisfied, he went to deal with official business. When he went to court, he didn't like anyone. Without Wei Wei Bai by his side, he was irritated. So when he did things, he was frighteningly cold. As a result, the recently rotten imperial court's extravagant atmosphere was completely gone. Every official was working hard, fighting for results. They didn't even dare to embezzle. They were afraid that Ning Jioma would catch them and hang them up in a frying pan. Yes, this cruel emperor really dared to do that. But his cruelty made the lives of the common people better. As for the lack of women in the harem, they needed to choose. Who dared to say it? No one dared to say it. Whoever said it would die. Ning Jioma dealt with the government affairs expressionlessly. The efficiency of the officials nowadays was terrifying. Everyone wished that they could shorten the time they spent in court to just 1 second. So the emperor and ministers worked together to compress the time of the court to a very short period of time. There was no more flattery because there was no time. He was busy dealing with government affairs. There were no blockbusters singing praises because there was no time. Didn't you see the emperor's sour face? There wasn't a single word of nonsense. If there was something to say it quickly. If there was nothing to say, then slap yourself. Congratulations, the working hours have been shortened. Everyone had holidays now. To Ning Jiumo, being the emperor didn't give him any sense of achievement or happiness. If he didn't want to be the emperor, he could let Wei be the empress. Furthermore, he could collect all kinds of precious medicinal herbs in the palace to nourish Wei by. He couldn't wait to give up on government affairs. Ning Jiumo walked into the palace, and Zheng Yi immediately came over to help him take off his emperor's robes. He lowered his eyes and said, "Is Wei still not awake?" Zheng Kuang paused for a moment before replying cautiously, "Your Majesty, Her Highness hasn't woken up yet." However, a palace maid said that she saw Her Highness' eyelashes move as if she's about to wake up. Ning Jiumo sneered. He didn't say whether he believed it or not. But Zheng Yao felt that Ning Jiumo didn't dare to believe it. He had been disappointed so many times that he was on the verge of despair. Ning Jiumo suddenly felt a little tired. He stood there in a daze for a while before saying, "You guys can leave. I'll stay with Wei for a while." Zheng Qiao retreated silently. Ning Jiumo's footsteps were a little shaky. He looked at the curtains in front of him in a daze. How long had it been since he heard Wei call out to him? Ning Jiumo didn't know how long he could hold on. Every day ended in despair and began in anticipation. Chapter 1644. He worked hard to deal with government affairs so that he could empty his mind for some time. He didn't want to break down. Suddenly, he heard the crisp sound of a bell. It was as if someone had pulled open the curtain outside the bed and shook the bell. Ning Jiumo felt that he must be hallucinating, but he couldn't help but quicken his steps. He reached out and pulled open the curtain. The beads on the curtain made the person standing by the window suddenly turn around. The jade hairpin in her hair swayed. Under the sunlight, it had a warm luster. Ning Jiumo stopped in his tracks and looked at her in a daze. The window was open, and the wind blew in, causing her beautiful dress to sway slightly. She held the kite in her hand and revealed a gentle smile. "You put the kite I made by the window. It's so ugly. Luckily, you don't mind." Ning Jiumo's lips moved, but he couldn't say anything. Wei Bai held the kite in her hand and turned her head in confusion. "Your Highness! Your Highness!" This form of address caused his tensed heart to immediately collapse and soften. Ning Jiumo replied softly, "Yes, Wei." After he said that, he stumbled over and reached out to hold her thin face. Then big tears fell from his eyes. "Wei, why did you only wake up? It's so hard without you protecting me." With that, he hugged her and cried pitifully. Wei Bai, when he was in a vegetative state, she saw him cry every day. She wanted to wake up and stop him from crying. She was tired of seeing him cry like this. But when she woke up, he was still crying. In the future, don't call him Fool Ning. Call him Crybaby Ning. Crybaby Ning complained to her while crying. Those ministers were not good people. Those palace maids and eunuchs were all an eyesore. Without her, he would get lost. This palace was too big. He was cold. Wei Bai felt that she had become an old mother again. But for the sake of those annoying videos, she accepted her fate and continued to comfort Ning Jiumo. "Wei, don't protect me in the future." "Yes, let me protect you." He didn't dare and didn't want her to have a second chance to sleep like this. He would rather she did not protect him, as long as her life was smooth and safe. Continuation of the retarded crown prince's little palace maid. The mentally retarded crown prince had become a mentally retarded emperor. It was another rainy season. Wei Bai stepped on wooden clogs and carried the food box to the dilapidated Ning Wang Palace. The green grass in front of the palace gate had long been uprooted and filled with begonia flowers. Wei Bai shook off the water on the umbrella, then put it down and entered the door. Ning Jiumo looked up when he heard the voice. He was flying a kite when he saw Wei Bai. He smiled and said, "Wei, look, this is an eagle's kite. I even put a centipede and a mouse on the kite. When the time comes, we'll be able to watch the eagle catch the mouse." Wei Bai saw the lifelike eagle, centipede, and mouse. She was speechless at his retarded behavior. Only then did he put the food in the box on the small stove to warm it up. Ning Jiuma immediately squeezed over and picked up the fan to fan the fire. He said pitifully, "The Imperial Kitchen is bullying us again. They sent us cold food." Wei Wei Bai was expressionless. "Oh," Ning Jiuma said, "but it's okay. I have a house full of gold and silver. You can use it to bribe the Imperial chef and ask him to stew a chicken for us." Wei Wei Bai held her face with both hands. She was extremely bored. "Oh." Ning Jiuma was a little embarrassed and bumped her shoulder. "Ah Wei, why don't you hug me? It's so cold here." Wei Wei Bai, oh, / Chapter 1645. Ning Jiuma looked at her pink side profile and couldn't help but lower his head to kiss her. Bai Weiwei grabbed the palm leaf fan in his hand and hit him on the head with a slap. "That's enough. You left such a shabby place for this purpose. From time to time, you would drag me here to reminisce about the past." As an emperor, he didn't do proper things. He spent all his time here. Ning Jiuma picked up the warm food and said with a smile, "Am I not here to relive our beautiful past?" Wei Wei Bai, how is it beautiful? The leaky roof or the shabby bed? Ning Jiuma pulled her up and held her in his arms. He wrapped his arms around her waist. "As long as I come here, I will remember the memories of knowing Ah Wei. Wei Wei Bai, I also remember the memory of you rolling on the ground weekly at that time. Ning Jiuma, Wei Wei Bai, and the beautiful memory of walking upside down with disheveled hair. Ning Jiuma, Wei Wei Bai, the beautiful memory of seeing a mouse and huddling in the corner in fear, crying and shouting that I was scared." Ning Jiuma. Suddenly, he didn't want to recall the past. It was all his dark history. While Wei Wei Bai was still reminiscing about the beautiful past, Ning Jiuma immediately reached out and carried her up, easily pressing her down on the creaking old bed. He lowered his head, his breath blowing on her lips. His voice was hoarse and charming. "I also remember the beautiful memory of Ah Wei lying under me, panting softly." Wei Wei Bai's body stiffened, and she reached out to push him. Her fingers were weak, because for some reason, the high-level minimum wage and the infinite strength conflicted. So after she came back from the dead, the infinite strength disappeared. She couldn't beat Ning Jiuma, who had been training himself. Ning Jiuma could win against a few Imperial Guards now. Subduing her was an easy task. Her weak strength couldn't cause any obstacle to him at all. Ning Jiuma looked at her deeply and lowered his head to kiss her. Wei Wei Bai complained softly, "That's enough, Ning Jiuma." Ning Jiuma replied, faintly, "Oh." Then he clasped her fingers tightly, not letting her escape. Her long hair fell apart, and the begonia flower on his hairpin fell to the ground. A small stove in the corner was burning warmly. Ning Jiuma felt that he should come here from time to time to relive their beautiful past. It was beautiful and delicious. Mentally retarded emperors are the dividing line between 2 and 3 things. "Your Majesty, the Empress has no children. She should choose a consort and add new people to the harem," a new minister said sternly and righteously. Ning Jiuma was busy dealing with government affairs and couldn't be bothered to deal with them. "Don't talk if there's nothing important. Go down." The minister felt that he had no place to put his loyalty. He knelt down and said, "Your Majesty, how can an emperor be without an heir? Who will be entrusted to this country after 100 years? Without an heir to inherit it, there will definitely be a reign of terror, and the people will be plunged into misery and suffering." The other ministers looked at the new minister. He had just been transferred from another city, so his brain was not clear. Then, all the ministers silently took a few steps back to distance themselves from this guy. Ning Jiuma was finally annoyed by the nagging. He looked up coldly, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. "So what if the people are plunged into misery and suffering after I die? What does the reign of terror have to do with me? Wasn't it hard enough when I was on the throne? Do I have to care even after death?" The minister looked up blankly and looked at Ning Jiuma in confusion. When he was in another city, he heard the praises of the people everywhere. / Chapter 1646. In his heart, Ning Jiuma was a godlike, wise emperor. Why was he so wise? Did all wise emperors have such personality? Ning Jiuma picked up the memorial impatiently. You wrote this, right? If you don't know how to write a memorial, then don't write it. I'm annoyed by the nonsense in front. The words at the beginning were his heartfelt praise. They were all the truth. How was it nonsense? The minister looked at him blankly. Ning Jiuma threw the memorial at him. Get lost. I'm annoyed when I see you. The minister felt that he was loyal. Even if he was killed, he had to do it for the emperor. Your Majesty, even if you kill me, I still want you to choose. Ning Jiuma finally couldn't take it anymore. If Wei hadn't asked him to treat the minister well. Don't scare people with a pot of oil every day. Where do you get the patience to sit here and listen to people's nonsense? Ning Jiuma said straightforwardly, I can't do it. I can't do it. Other than the empress, I want to vomit when I see any woman. The minister, Ning Jiuma, are you satisfied? Since you like to choose so much, someone choose 100 women for him to bring back. The minister was stunned. Ning Jiuma got up and said coldly, You bother me with a bunch of meaningless things every day. Wei went to pick the lotus. I didn't make it in time. All of you deserve to die. When he walked out, Ning Jiuma didn't forget to add insult to injury. Children? I can't have children in this life because I can't. Such a private matter was a fatal blow to men. His Majesty could actually say it so openly. He was indeed a wise emperor. One of the ministers came over and patted the kneeling foreign minister. Brother, you have to get used to it. This is His Majesty's style. When he met the empress, he had a crazy personality. The foreign minister cried. His Majesty can't do it. I can't tell good from bad and hurt His Majesty. All the ministers twitched. His Majesty? No one in the world could do it. Those who knew the inside story knew that the empress was seriously injured and couldn't have children in this life. To protect the empress, His Majesty spread rumors that he couldn't do it. Everyone knew. For the sake of the empress, His Majesty was willing to go around biting people. Ning Jiuma came to the lakeside and saw a small boat among the slender lotus leaves. The boat was filled with lotus flowers, and Wei was taking a nap with a lotus leaf covering her face. Ning Jiuma jumped onto the boat. Wei was shocked. Ning Jiuma had already lowered his body, removed the lotus leaf from her face, and kissed her. This kiss was filled with the fragrance of lotus flowers. He kissed Wei so hard that she almost stopped breathing. Ning Jiuma's hair was also stuck with lotus petals. He looked up, and his handsome face looked even more mature and reserved after time. But his tone was still childish. Wei, someone wants me to have a child again today. Wei was pinned down by him and could not get up. She reached out and slapped his face away in disdain. If you want to give birth, go ahead. I can't give birth. This guy was getting more and more paranoid. In the past few years, they had surrounded the imperial palace like an iron bucket. She was only satisfied when she went out to play with a group of people. Ning Jiuma licked his lips and narrowed his eyes dangerously. I heard that it's more exciting outside and easier to have a baby. Let's try. He clearly knew that she couldn't give birth. It was just an excuse for XX. Wei kicked him, but she couldn't kick him away. She missed the power of infinite strength deeply once again. Ning Jiuma held her foot easily. Wei, it's okay if you don't have a child. You have me. Chapter 1647. After he finished speaking, he entangled her again and crushed a few lotuses. I can be your chubby doll. Wei knocked on the system. Does your main system not care about this shameless driver? The system looked at the bullet screen that filled the sky. Who am I? Where am I? Where am I going to get my raisins? The retarded emperor followed up with the separation line many years later. Ning Jiuma carefully held Wei Bai's hand and walked up the stairs. They were dressed in the emperor and empress robes, which were complicated and gorgeous. Under the city walls, there were thousands of noisy people. When they saw the emperor and empress on the city walls, they immediately knelt down and bowed. The mighty waves of long live came from all directions. Ning Jiuma reached out and straightened Wei Bai's collar. Today is the Lantern Festival. Thousands of people are worshipping. I only want to be with you. Wei Wei Bai looked at his white hair, and her expression finally softened. She said softly, "When I see you, I feel old." They were about the same age, and both had white hair. Ning Jiuma's eyes were full of tenderness, and his tone was sincere. "My Ah Wei is the most beautiful woman in the world. She never grows old. Wei Wei Bai, I also don't want to grow old. Seeing myself turn into an old woman every day, I reject it." Ning Jiuma held her hand and walked to a higher city tower. Thousands of miles of mountains and rivers stretched out under their feet. Ah Wei, no matter how big the mountains and rivers are, it's not as big as when you entered the palace and met me and called me your highness. After so many years, the mountains and rivers were not as big as her smile. If it wasn't for his Ah Wei, he didn't want anything. He might have been a fatuous ruler long ago. He lit the fire and sent lychees, as long as he could win her favor. Wei Wei Bai turned to look at him and suddenly said softly, "Your Highness." Ning Jiuma was stunned, and his eyes suddenly moistened. He held her hand and kissed it. "Yes, Ah Wei, I'm here. A lifetime wasn't that long. Every day was good. Because you're here, it's over." Wei Wei Bai's head hurt more than ever. She felt that she was in so much pain every time. Sooner or later, her head would change. She struggled to wake up, but her vision was dark. It was time for her to return to reality. In the end, she would die in Ning Jiuma's arms. Ning Jiuma had been a wise emperor his entire life, and his harem had been empty for his entire life. After she died, he also left this world. Her mission was complete, so the system should have brought her back to reality. Wei Wei Bai struggled to open her eyes. Some golden specks of light appeared out of nowhere. She took a closer look and saw a man standing in the golden light not far away. Golden rays of light fell like snowflakes. His clothes were glowing in the golden light. However, that light was filled with flowing blood. The man's body was tall and slender, but when he stood, he gave people a trembling feeling that he could destroy the world. Wei Wei Bai shouted strangely, "Tongzi, we passed through again?" The system didn't respond. Was it blocked again? Wei Wei Bai felt uneasy. There were so many planes and so long to conquer. The system was her only source of comfort. Even for her, if the system was there. Even if the system didn't do anything, she would still dare to do whatever she wanted as if she had a backing. Suddenly, the man in front of her seemed to have heard her voice. He turned his head slightly and said calmly, "Who are you?" Wei Wei Bai. How should she answer? Who am I? Where am I? Where am I going? Slash. Chapter 1648. Why was it that when he woke up, he was not in the real world, and he did not see the system? Why did he come to such a damned place? Could it be that this scammer in front of him was Tongzi? The system kept nagging him about how handsome he was. Could this be him? Wei Wei Bai thought about it again. No, the system was so familiar with her that they could wear the same pants. How could it not recognize her? Gulp. Something dropped. Bai Wei Wei lowered her head in hindsight, and then she saw a skull looking at her. Wei Wei Bai, who was used to big scenes, remained calm. There seemed to be more than one skull. Humans had blind spots in their vision. If a skull suddenly appeared in a clean area, it would be very dangerous. He saw it immediately. But what if there were many skulls? Wei Wei Bai saw countless bones and skulls beneath her feet, forming a terrifying mountain of bones. At the foot of the mountain, there were countless severed limbs and corpses, and what soaked in them was a boundless sea of blood. Wei Wei Bai also felt a chill in her head. Could there be ghosts in this place? Wei Wei Bai's feet went numb. She took a few steps back and kicked several skulls. She couldn't wait to light the incense. Big brother or big sister, I didn't kick you on purpose, so don't come looking for me. She was most afraid of ghosts. As for the man, he didn't get an answer and finally turned around. His black hair fell to his waist, fluttering in the wind. Amidst the black hair, his golden eyes were as cold as a bottomless abyss. At the highest point behind him, there was a throne made of white bones. Beside the throne, there was a rusted sword stained with blood. He was like an emperor in the abyss, emotionless and desireless, walking on the path of thousands of corpses. He looked down at the ants beneath his feet. Even though Wei Wei Bai had experienced so many things in front of this man, she still couldn't accept it. She also felt an uncontrollable fear in her heart. It was as if she was just a skull beside his feet that he could crush at any time. It was higher than where he stood. She was under his feet. Wei Wei Bai suddenly felt that if he exerted force with his foot, the skull under his feet would collapse and bury her alive. The man stood there like a deity, without a shred of humanity. However, he spoke again. "Who are you?" This sentence was not as emotionless as it had been the first time. Instead, there was a trace of emotion that was so faint that it was almost undetectable. Wei Wei Bai had a strange intuition that she couldn't answer. If he answered, something bad would happen. Therefore, Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but take a few steps back. Without the system, she couldn't do anything. He had to be careful and protect himself. The man suddenly moved. He slowly walked down, and with each step, a skull shattered. Wei Wei Bai felt a headache for those skeletons. The man was quite a distance away. Other than a pair of eyes that were as exquisite as a work of art, Wei Wei Bai couldn't see his face clearly. When she saw him walking over, she couldn't help but take a few steps back. However, this could not shorten the distance between the two of them. The man was walking very slowly, but he was very stubborn. Step by step, he shortened the distance between the two of them. He slowly stretched out his hand, and there was a clear red line on his wrist. Wei Wei Bai felt a tightness on her wrist. She looked down and saw that there was a red line on her wrist too. What was this thing? "Come here." The man's voice was faint and deep, with a force that couldn't be refused. Wei Wei Bai felt a huge force on her wrist. Slash. Chapter 1649. She was dragged forward and was about to be dragged to the man's side. Wei Wei Bai immediately used her feet to block the gap between the skeleton mountain. There were so many bones. This man must be a man-eating monster. She would be eaten if she went over. The man's voice was suppressed and unhappy. "Why are you resisting? Come over." Wei Wei Bai was about to speak when her eyebrows jumped. She suddenly saw the man's face clearly. Yi Yuxuan? But before Wei Wei Bai could see more clearly, a monstrous red flame burst out from the dark world. The flame was like a giant dragon, rushing towards Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei Bai, she was going to be roasted into steak. Then she was hit by the giant fire dragon. A raging sea of fire burned on the skeleton mountain, and Wei Wei Bai disappeared in the flames. The man was originally calm, but when he saw the weak soul suddenly disappear, he stood there silently for a long time before slowly returning to the mountaintop. He sat on the seat of bones, his eyes indifferent and calm as he looked at the raging sea of blood. Then he gently raised his hand. The sea of fire was crushed by a force that could destroy everything. The red flame turned into a speck of light and disappeared in the boundless golden light. The world returned to darkness. He sat for a while before strangely reaching out to touch his chest. What did he feel like he had lost? Who was that weak soul? And the red line in his hand was glowing with a golden light, faintly flowing with a paranoid force. The system hugged Wei Wei Bai's soul. "Mother!" Wei Wei Bai almost couldn't come back. When it carried Wei Wei Bai through the soul passage, she was gone in the blink of an eye. It was the first time it lost its host's soul. It was so scared that it burst into tears. The host's soul was more fragile than anyone else's. If it was lost like this, any space-time turbulence could take her life. The system was going crazy looking for her, but suddenly it saw the fate roulette and thought of something before rushing into the golden light. As expected, she was taken away by Yi Yuxuan's power. Yi Yuxuan's unawakened power was becoming stronger and stronger. This power was in the depths of his soul. It became more and more obvious as his emotions grew. The place where Wei Wei Bai had just entered. It was in the depths of Yi Yuxuan's soul, in that world that belonged only to Yi Yuxuan's power. And in that world, only Yi Yuxuan's ignorant consciousness existed. That consciousness was born from Yi Yuxuan's obsession. If Wei Wei Bai had answered Yi Yuxuan's question just now, then Yi Yuxuan remembered who she was. Wei Wei Bai couldn't come back at all. Yi Yuxuan's feelings were twisted by the accumulation of feelings from so many planes. In his subconscious, there was only one terrifying obsession. He wanted to keep Wei Wei Bai. Even if he wanted to keep her soul, he wanted to keep her. So Wei Wei Bai's soul was almost swallowed up by Yi Yuxuan's powerful soul power. There was a kind of love that ate your soul. We merged into one. It was all love. The system hugged the weak Wei Wei Bai's soul tightly and cursed in a low voice. Yi Yuxuan, you're sick. Control your power. Sooner or later, the host will die because of you. Yi Yuxuan himself definitely didn't want to hurt Wei Wei Bai, but he couldn't stop his power from going out of control. This time, the host's soul was almost left in the depths of Yi Yuxuan's soul and couldn't come back. The system saw the boundary between reality and immediately rushed over, stepping on red fireworks. She fell asleep quietly. The system stuffed her soul into her body. / to make it easier for you to read it next time, you can click. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.